On certain nights in Venice, when the lagoon is still and the wind carries the scent of salt and smoke, the island of Murano seems to whisper ancient secrets. There is a reason that for centuries, travelers spoke of this place in hushed tones. An island where every furnace burned like a guarded heart. An island where men were forbidden to leave, not because they were criminals, but because they were too valuable to lose. Murano was the sanctuary and the prison of the greatest glassmakers the world had ever known. The Republic of Venice understood the truth long before modern empires did. Power does not only belong to armies or fleets or gold. Power belongs to those who control knowledge. And so they built a fortress of silence around their artisans, a fortress enforced by law, by fear, and by an unspoken understanding. Some secrets are worth more than kingdoms. Tonight, as you sit with me beside a quiet fire, let us return to the world they shaped. A world where molten sand glowed brighter than treasure, where a single glass chalice could bankrupt a prince, and where the art of bending light itself became a weapon of economic dominance. The Venetian glass monopoly was not merely a chapter in history. It was a philosophy, a blueprint of how civilizations rise when they learn to protect the rare and the irreplaceable. If this journey into forgotten wealth, hidden power, and ancient strategy speaks to you, consider liking this video, subscribing to the Echoes of Wealth channel, or supporting the work so these stories can continue to burn brightly in the dark. There is a moment in the history of Venice when the city made a decision so cold, so calculated, and yet so strangely poetic, that even now it feels less like policy and more like a scene from an old legend. It began in the year 1291, when the Great Council feared that a single careless ember from a glass furnace might set their wooden city ablaze. Under the pretense of protection, they ordered every glassmaker to leave the city and relocate to Murano. But everyone understood the truth. They were not being moved for safety. They were being contained. Imagine the procession of boats that morning. The craftsmen stood upon the decks with their families, with the tools handed down to them by fathers and grandfathers. The air carried the sound of slow paddles cutting the water. Some of the artisans looked back at Venice as though watching a lover turn away. Others stared straight ahead, masking the dread beneath their pride. For these men, their skill was their life, and now that skill had imprisoned them. They were the only people in the Republic both granted noble privileges and simultaneously watched as closely as spies. They lived in homes with windows facing inward, toward guarded courtyards, as if the city wished to keep their gaze contained. Letters sent in or out of the island were quietly intercepted, copied, or delayed, and the artisans learned over time that Murano was not merely an island. It was a velvet cage. Their families prospered in ways the common people of Venice could not imagine. Glassmakers dined with the aristocracy. They were allowed to carry swords, a privilege usually reserved for the nobility. Their daughters married into wealthy merchant families, and their sons inherited prestige along with the trade. But the price of this elevation was freedom. Once a man became a master glassmaker, he could never leave Murano without special permission, and permission was almost never granted. It was said that the lagoon itself was their wall of water, shimmering and deceptive, beautiful in the morning and merciless by night. There were rumors whispered among the apprentices that if a master tried to escape, assassins loyal to the Council of Ten would find him in any foreign land. And though Venice never publicly admitted it, more than one artisan who fled was found floating face down in distant harbors, his hands mysteriously untouched, but his future forever silenced. Yet life on Murano was not only confinement, it was creation. The furnaces roared day and night, their flames reflected in the eyes of men who shaped molten sand as if it were alive. They created goblets so thin they trembled like dragonfly wings, mirrors that captured light with an almost supernatural clarity, and beads that merchants carried along the Silk Road to the courts of Chinese emperors. The glassmakers lived in a world balanced between danger and reverence, between privilege and captivity. And in that tension, their art reached heights the world had never seen. What made them different from the craftsmen of other lands was not only technique, but the quiet understanding that every gesture, every formula, every whisper of innovation belonged not to the individual, but to the Republic itself. Venice had tied their skill to loyalty, their ambition to obedience, and their survival to secrecy. And as strange as it seems, many of the artisans accepted this fate with serenity. They believed they were chosen vessels of a sacred craft, guardians of a light that must never fall into unworthy hands. Their days were filled with rituals. A master walking to the furnace at dawn would touch the stone archway for luck. Apprentices swept the rooms in patterns believed to align the flow of fire. Before creating cristallo, the most prized glass of all, some artisans recited old prayers or mumbled incantations remembered from their ancestors. These were not superstitions in the eyes of the craftsmen. They were threads connecting them to a lineage that stretched into the depths of forgotten centuries. To betray the craft by fleeing was not only treason to Venice, it was sacrilege. And yet, beneath the shimmering surface of Murano's prosperity, a quiet question haunted every master. If your freedom is taken in exchange for your gift, does the gift still belong to you, or have you become part of the treasure yourself? Venice believed it owned the hands, the minds, the secrets. The artisans believed the fire had chosen them. Between these two beliefs, a delicate and dangerous equilibrium formed, one that kept the island suspended like a glowing ember in the heart of the lagoon. As the years transformed Murano from a temporary relocation into a sealed world of its own, a deep, unspoken culture began to take shape. Life on the island moved with a rhythm unlike anywhere else in Europe. Each dawn began with the same haunting sound, the low groan of the great furnaces awakening, as though ancient creatures were stirring beneath the stone floors. The heat radiated through the alleys, and even in winter, the air hummed with a dryness that clung to the skin. Children grew up knowing the language of fire before they learned the language of books. They could recognize the personality of each furnace by sound, distinguishing one from another the way a musician knows the voices of different instruments. Inside these workshops, the hierarchy was absolute. At the top stood the maestri, the masters, men whose reputations traveled farther than they ever could. Some were known for creating glass so pure it rang like a bell when tapped. Others could twist molten threads into patterns that resembled lace. And a few, the most revered and the most feared, were rumored to hold secrets that Venice itself could not fully understand. Among these was a man named Giuliano da Murano, whose existence is barely mentioned in the official records, but appears in the letters of foreign diplomats and the diaries of traveling scholars. Giuliano was said to have developed a method of making glass with a surface so reflective that it captured colors not visible to the naked eye. Some called it an illusion. Others whispered that he had discovered a way to enchant light, bending it in patterns that seemed unnatural. Venice protected him with ferocity. Even the Council of Ten, known for its ruthlessness, treated him with a respect that bordered on reverence. But not all masters lived in harmony with their confinement. In the corner taverns of Murano, away from the watchful eyes of the city's informants, stories circulated of men who dreamed of escape. These were not cowards or opportunists, but artisans who felt the weight of their lineage pressing too heavily upon them. One such story, rarely told openly but preserved through generations of whispers, concerned a master named Marco Bellini. He was celebrated for crafting the finest glass mirrors in Europe, mirrors so precise and illuminating that some called them the eyes of Venus. Marco's work attracted the attention of foreign courts, and rumors began spreading that the King of France had offered him a fortune in gold to flee Venice and teach his craft in Paris. One night, under the cover of a moonless sky, Marco attempted the impossible. He disguised himself as a fisherman, wrapped his tools in oiled cloth, and boarded a small boat bound for the mainland. But Venice's intelligence network was unmatched. Long before Marco reached the open waters, a patrol intercepted him. The records claim only that he was returned to Murano, but the truth lived in the frightened silence of every artisan who heard the tale. Marco was never seen again. Some believed he had been imprisoned and forced to work in secret. Others said he had been executed quietly, his body buried in the foundations of a furnace. A darker version suggested that the Council of Ten had allowed him to live but amputated the fingers that had made him famous. No one knew for sure. But every craftsman understood the message. The secrets of Murano would stay in Murano, even if it meant breaking the hands that held them. And yet, the island's strange blend of privilege and captivity created something no other place on Earth could replicate. A society of men who were both artists and guardians, prisoners and nobles, rare individuals who learned to carry their confinement with dignity, turning necessity into mastery. Their world was defined by rituals of protection. Families arranged marriages to keep secrets within trusted bloodlines. Apprentices took oaths before touching their first piece of molten glass. The formulas for the most valuable techniques were never written down, passed only orally, often at night, from father to son. Some families claimed that the recipes themselves were alive, that they would reject the unworthy and reveal their full brilliance only to those who treated the craft with humility. This culture created a fortress more powerful than any stone wall Venice could build. A fortress made of identity, tradition, fear, pride, and a deep belief that their art was not merely a craft, but a calling. The men of Murano lived inside a paradox that defined their entire existence. They were free to create works that dazzled kings, yet trapped within an island they could not leave. They were glorified beyond measure, yet constantly watched by unseen eyes. And every time the flames flickered against the glass they shaped, they were reminded that beauty sometimes grows brightest in places where escape is impossible. There were nights on Murano when the heat from the furnaces rose into the sky like a private aurora, staining the clouds with hues of orange and pale gold. On such nights, the masters often worked in silence, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were priests tending to a sacred fire. The apprentices watched with a reverence rarely found outside temples. They knew that every gesture, every turn of the pipe, every subtle breath could alter the shape of the molten glass. The fire revealed the truth of a man. It exposed arrogance, rewarded patience, punished uncertainty, and demanded absolute presence. Among the island's many mysteries, none fascinated travelers more than the rumored brotherhoods that existed among the most accomplished maestri. These groups were said to meet in shuttered rooms long after the furnaces had dimmed. Their gatherings were never recorded in the official archives, yet their influence appeared in the sudden leaps of innovation that would emerge, seemingly, without warning. Some said they met to share dangerous knowledge, techniques too powerful or too valuable to pass through ordinary apprenticeships. Others believed the brotherhood served a different purpose, one more psychological than technical. They helped the masters endure the burden of their confinement. A man who possessed genius was often a man who struggled with solitude. And on Murano, solitude was woven into the very fabric of daily life. One such rumored circle was called the Order of the Fire Veil. Supposedly formed during the 15th century, this group allegedly discovered methods for creating opaline glass that seemed to glow from within, as if illuminated by moonlight. Whether truth or embellishment, these stories gave Murano its aura of mystique. Travelers wrote about them in coded letters to noble patrons, suggesting that Venice had achieved a level of mastery so profound it blurred the line between chemistry and enchantment. Some even claimed that members of the order could read the temperature of molten glass by feeling the tremor of the pipe beneath their hands, a sensitivity beyond ordinary human perception. Yet life on the island was not only shaped by genius, it was shaped by the shadows that hunted genius. The Council of Ten understood that brilliance without constraint could become dangerous. So they surrounded the artisans with invisible boundaries. Merchants who visited Murano were watched discreetly by men dressed as dock workers. Foreign dignitaries were escorted through the workshops with careful choreography, guided away from the stations where the most secretive work took place. Even the masters themselves were not exempt from scrutiny. It was quietly understood that every workshop held at least one pair of loyal ears, someone who reported unusual behavior or whispered conversations to the authorities. This atmosphere of watchfulness bred caution in every aspect of life. When a master spoke, he weighed each word. When he taught, he revealed only what he judged appropriate. And when he innovated, he often did so in the solitude of night, ensuring that only the flames bore witness. Many families kept private journals in cipher, documenting their experiments, their failures, and their breakthroughs. If an apprentice ever discovered such a journal, he did not speak of it. To reveal a family secret, even accidentally, could mean exile from the craft. And on Murano, exile was considered worse than death. A man who lost his craft lost his identity, his lineage, and the respect of the artisan community. He became invisible. Still, for all its dangers, the island pulsed with a strange and intoxicating pride. Children grew up believing that their fathers shaped not glass, but destiny. Young men whispered dreams of creating a new form of cristallo, or inventing a technique so flawless that even the Doge himself would request it. The weight of expectation was immense, but it forged them in ways soft freedom never could. Murano taught them that mastery is not merely the result of talent, it is the result of endurance. It is the quiet acceptance that great work demands sacrifice, sometimes even the sacrifice of one's freedom. The world beyond Murano often wondered why the artisans accepted their confinement, why they did not rebel or flee or challenge Venice itself. But those who asked such questions misunderstood the heart of the island. Murano was both captor and muse. The restrictions were harsh, but the environment was perfect for creation. The masters were sheltered from distractions. Their lives were shaped entirely by their craft. In a strange and paradoxical way, Venice had given them the one gift no artisan elsewhere could claim: time. Unbroken, undiluted, utterly devoted time. And in that time, generation after generation pushed the boundaries of what glass could become. The results were undeniable. Murano's chandeliers hung like frozen constellations in the palaces of Europe. Its mirrors reshaped the way people saw themselves. Its beads became currency on distant trade routes. Each object carried the breath of a man who lived behind fire and water, a man who had chosen, or been compelled, to bind his life to the furnace. Every piece of Murano glass was a testament to a world where beauty was shaped under pressure, where luxury was born from limitation, and where mastery lived side by side with captivity. As the Renaissance dawned across Europe, Murano entered what many later called its age of brilliance. Yet behind that brilliance lay a truth few dared to speak aloud. The island was not simply a center of craftsmanship. It had become a laboratory where the human spirit was tested by pressure, secrecy, and expectation. And in this crucible of fire and confinement, some men rose into near-mythic figures, while others slowly crumbled under the weight of their unseen chains. Among the masters whose names drifted through the alleys like legends was Lorenzo Barbarigo. His family claimed distant ties to one of Venice's noble houses, though this was never officially recognized. What mattered more was the rumor that Lorenzo possessed an almost uncanny memory. He could recite formulas whispered to him at childhood. He could recall the color of a flame from experiments conducted decades earlier. Apprentices swore he could sense when a furnace was losing heat, even before the temperature dropped. He spent his nights alone in the workshop, his face lit by the glow of molten glass, his hands moving with the precision of a man communing with something older than himself. Some said he spoke to the fire. Others claimed the fire spoke back. Lorenzo's craft grew so exceptional that foreign envoys requested private audiences simply to watch him work. One ambassador from the Ottoman Empire wrote in a coded letter that he had seen a man on Murano who shapes light with his fingers, as if he were tracing the language of God. Venice read that letter. Of course, they read everything. And though they allowed the ambassador's admiration, they tightened their watch on Lorenzo. There were whispers that he had begun to dream of freedom, that he wished to see the lands his creations traveled to, that he felt the island walls closing around him. But the Council of Ten had already marked him as irreplaceable. The more extraordinary a man became, the more firmly the invisible chains clamped around him. Lorenzo was not alone in this inner struggle. Many masters lived with a dual identity. They were celebrated publicly, but monitored privately. Their names were praised in the salons of Venice, yet their movements were shadowed by informants dressed as fishermen, servants, or simple workmen. Some artisans developed unusual habits to cope with this constant vigilance. A few slept only during the day, refusing to rest when the rest of the island did, convinced that their dreams were safer under the shadows of noon. Others kept their most precious experiments hidden in plain sight, disguising breakthrough formulas inside trivial mixtures so that only a trained hand could distinguish the two. A small number abandoned innovation altogether, choosing safety over risk, their genius locked behind self-imposed restraint. And yet, despite the fear and the tension, Murano remained a place of breathtaking wonder. At sunset, when the lagoon shimmered with the final rays of day, the windows of the workshops glowed like lanterns dotting the water. The island seemed suspended between two worlds, one shaped by human ambition and another shaped by something more ancient. Even the air tasted different. Salt from the sea mingled with traces of ash and metallic heat. The smell became a kind of signature, a scent that marked anyone who lived on the island. Travelers later wrote that you could identify a Murano artisan in a crowded tavern simply by the faint aroma of fire clinging to his clothes. Families, too, were shaped by the weight of this heritage. Children were taught early to keep their voices low when speaking of their family's methods. Mothers reminded their sons that loose words could sink the lineage. Some elders told frightening stories of the listeners, ghost-like figures who wandered the island at night, pressing their ears to walls to catch accidental whispers. These stories were meant to frighten, but they also served as warnings. Every generation knew what was at stake. To lose a secret was to lose a fortune. But more than that, it was to lose the identity that defined them. Yet, beneath the rituals and the vigilance, something remarkable began to happen across the decades. The artisans formed a silent brotherhood, not through formal vows, but through shared suffering. They understood each other's burdens intimately. A man did not need to speak his fear aloud for another to feel it. And from that unspoken connection emerged a kind of grace. When a master struggled with a difficult piece, others offered subtle help without compromising their family's proprietary knowledge. When someone lost a loved one, the entire island mourned quietly. And when an apprentice shattered a nearly finished work, something that happened often, no one berated him. They simply handed him the pipe again. On Murano, the fire always offered another chance. But the deeper truth was this: the prison that confined the artisans also protected them. Venice's iron grip, harsh as it appeared, created an environment where mastery could flourish uninterrupted. There were no distractions, no temptations of foreign courts, no competition that could steal their focus. The island became a monastery of creation, a place where time stretched differently, where years dissolved into a continuum of firelight, sweat, and innovation. And in that long, slow rhythm of confinement and excellence, the artisans learned something profound. Freedom may inspire brilliance, but boundaries, when wielded with precision, can refine it. Murano's greatest works were not born from liberty. They were born from the tension between desire and restraint, ambition and fear, brilliance and captivity. And it was within this paradox that the Venetian glass monopoly reached its immortal height. There were whispers in Renaissance Europe that somewhere across the waters of the Venetian lagoon lived men who could melt light itself. Traders carrying Murano glass across continents did not merely speak of craftsmanship. They spoke of alchemy, of a brotherhood capable of transmuting sand into clarity so pure it defied the world's understanding. And like all rumors of the extraordinary, these stories contained a kernel of truth wrapped in layers of myth. For centuries, the artisans of Murano guarded one creation above all others: cristallo, a glass so luminous, so flawlessly transparent, that even the most skilled craftsmen of Florence, Bohemia, and Damascus struggled to imitate it. To the courts of Europe, cristallo was not merely a material, it was a marvel. A chalice of cristallo placed on a banquet table drew more stares than the jewels worn by queens. Ambassadors used it as gifts when negotiating fragile alliances, knowing its allure transcended language and politics. And behind every piece of cristallo was the work of men who were treated by the Republic as living vaults. The origins of this miraculous substance were shrouded in ambiguity. Some claimed the technique had been inherited from Byzantine refugees fleeing the sack of Constantinople. Others said it arose organically on Murano as masters refined the ancient Roman methods. But among the artisans themselves, an older story circulated. They believed cristallo was discovered by accident one night when an apprentice, half asleep and trembling from exhaustion, mismeasured the ash mixture and tossed an unusual compound into the furnace. The resulting glass was so pure it looked as though a fragment of the moon had fallen into the workshop. The master of the furnace swore the flames changed color that night, glowing white for a heartbeat, as if reacting to the substance that had entered their domain. Whether myth or memory, the story persisted because it reflected a truth. Cristallo belonged as much to mystery as to method. To preserve its secrecy, Venice imposed laws as intricate as the craft itself. The formulas for cristallo were never written. Even the maestri learned them through a series of carefully staged lessons, revealed slowly over years. A master might teach his son the correct preparation of Levantine soda ash, but withhold the purification method until the young man proved his emotional discipline. Some families tested their apprentices by observing how they handled failure, believing that only a steady mind could be trusted with knowledge so valuable. Among these guarded families, one name had become almost legendary by the early 16th century: the Bortoluzzi lineage. They controlled a variation of cristallo that produced glass with a faint silver shimmer, visible only in candlelight. It was said that Isabella d'Este, one of the most powerful women of the Italian Renaissance, refused to dine without her Bortoluzzi crystal goblets. But the secret behind their shimmering glass remained elusive. Some suspected that the Bortoluzzi furnaces were fed with wood from a specific grove in the Veneto, the trees imbued with minerals from a forgotten riverbed. Others believed they used a rare and costly purification method involving blown air from bellows made of a specific animal hide. The most imaginative rumor claimed that the family maintained a small shrine within their workshop where offerings were made to the spirit of the flame. Outsiders laughed at this last tale, but the Bortoluzzi apprentices never did. They knew that sometimes superstition was not superstition at all, but a coded way of preserving a family's methods. The Venetians themselves embraced these rumors. Allowing outsiders to believe in miracles was far safer than letting them uncover the truth. Venice understood the psychology of secrecy better than any power of its time. They cultivated an aura around Murano. If the world believed the artisans were half alchemists, half magicians, then no ordinary craftsman would dare attempt to replicate their work. The mystique became a moat more powerful than law. It bred hesitation in the hearts of rival nations, and hesitation was the first step toward obedience. But secrecy was not merely an external shield. It was an internal creed. A master passed his technique not only to his sons, but to his chosen successor. Sometimes this was a biological child. Often it was the apprentice whose temperament proved most aligned with the fire. There are accounts of masters on their deathbeds whispering their final, most coveted formulas into the ear of a single chosen heir, forbidding even other family members from listening. These confessions were treated with the gravity of last rites. The moment the master exhaled his final breath, his knowledge, distilled across decades, passed entirely to one living vessel. Such rituals created tension within families. Brothers competed quietly for the trust of their father. Apprentices who had worked side by side for years eyed one another with a blend of admiration and envy. Yet these tensions rarely turned violent because the artisans knew the cost of discord. A broken lineage meant lost secrets, and lost secrets meant vulnerability. The island operated on a shared psychology. They protected one another, even as they competed, because they understood that the survival of their craft required collective silence as much as individual mastery. But beneath this disciplined unity, temptation simmered. Europe had entered an era of expanding horizons. Explorers brought back stories of new lands. Kings sought new technologies to strengthen their power. And in the courts of Paris, London, Prague, and the Ottoman Empire, there were whispers that if one could lure a Murano master away, entire industries could be reborn. A single formula could shift the balance of trade. A single artisan could alter the fate of a kingdom. And though Murano was a fortress of secrecy, even fortresses have cracks. This was the world the masters lived in. A world where their knowledge was priceless, where their hands were both revered and feared, and where every breath they took carried the weight of an entire republic's prosperity. They were not merely craftsmen. They were custodians of a secret that illuminated Europe. There is a strange silence that settles over Murano in the hours before dawn. The furnaces dim, but never fully sleep, pulsing with a faint red glow like the embers of some ancient creature. It was in these hours that the true work of the forbidden alchemists began. Not the official demonstrations given to visiting nobles, not the daytime showpieces crafted for merchant eyes, but the real experiments, the dangerous ones, the whispered ones that pushed glassmaking beyond craft and into the realm of the uncanny. Deep within the oldest workshop on the island, behind a door that bore no sign and a lock reinforced with iron bands, the master Niccolò Cerzanobi was said to conduct his nightly rituals. Niccolò was not as widely celebrated as the Bortoluzzi lineage or the famed Barbarigo family, but among the maestri he was treated with an unusual combination of caution and admiration. He was a man who had no apprentices, no sons, no heirs. He had never married and rarely spoke. Yet whenever a new form of glass appeared on Murano, glass infused with gold dust, glass that reflected the world with unsettling precision, glass that shifted color in candlelight, it was understood, though never said aloud, that Niccolò had touched the flame first. Some believed he had inherited secret manuscripts from an ancestor who once worked in the chemical laboratories of Padua. Others whispered even stranger things, that he had corresponded with Hermetic philosophers in Florence, that he studied the writings of Paracelsus, that he kept a collection of minerals from the Black Sea with properties known only to him. Regardless of the truth, Niccolò embodied the figure outsiders imagined when they described Murano's artisans as alchemists. He walked through the island with the slow, deliberate steps of a man listening to meanings hidden beneath ordinary sound. One of the few written accounts of Niccolò came from a German natural philosopher named Matthias Keller, who had visited Venice in the early 1500s. In his private diary, one that was never published but found centuries later, Keller described being invited to a midnight session in Niccolò's workshop. The invitation alone was extraordinary. The secrecy was absolute. Keller wrote that he entered a chamber lit by a single furnace that burned with a pale blue flame. Around it, the walls were lined with jars containing powders of colors he could not name. Niccolò moved with an eerie calm, touching glass rods, stirring mixtures, and examining molten strands with the focus of a surgeon handling a living body. At one point, Keller claimed to have seen Niccolò lower a tiny sliver of silver into the molten glass, causing the flame to flare into an unnatural green. When the glass cooled, it shimmered like the wing of a beetle. Keller later noted that he felt both awe and fear, as though he had witnessed a boundary being crossed between chemistry and something more arcane. This was the secret world behind the polished chandeliers and delicate goblets admired by royalty. A world of experimentation, intuition, and the quiet belief that the fire itself revealed truths to those who listened. The men of Murano understood materials the way a poet understands words. They knew how silica breathed when heated. They knew the moods of ash, the way impurities danced like ghosts within the glass. They knew that a furnace at the perfect temperature produced a sound, a low, resonant hum that vibrated against the ribs. And though Venice guarded the formulas, what they could not legislate was this deeper, instinctive mastery. The psychology of secrecy had shaped these men into something unique. Their isolation had forced them inward. Their captivity had sharpened their senses. Their lineage had tied them to a craft that demanded their entire selves. And from this crucible of intensity emerged innovation after innovation, each more astonishing than the last. By the mid-16th century, the fame of Murano had grown into something resembling obsession among European courts. Letters traveled across borders sealed with wax and urgency. The Habsburgs wanted Murano chandeliers to adorn their great halls. The Tudor court sought mirrored glass that captured every detail of a royal face. Catherine de' Medici sent envoys requesting colored glass tableware infused with rare minerals. But behind these requests were hidden agendas. Every court sought not just the glass itself, but the knowledge behind it. More than one foreign king offered sums of gold so large that even Venetian nobles would pause. A master who fled the island would be rewarded with estates, titles, and lifelong protection, and temptations grew. For most artisans, loyalty remained firm. Their families had lived on Murano for generations. Their identity was bound to the fire. But a few, young men ambitious enough to imagine a life beyond the lagoon, began to entertain dangerous thoughts. One of them, a brilliant but restless artisan named Alessandro Varin, nearly altered European history. A prodigy who mastered cristallo at an age when most apprentices were still learning to steady the blowpipe. Alessandro possessed a natural defiance that made older masters uneasy. His work caught the attention of foreign merchants whose visits to Murano were carefully monitored. And one night, with the help of a French diplomat, Alessandro attempted to flee, carrying only a small box containing powders and a handwritten formula he believed would earn him immortality. He was caught less than 3 miles from the lagoon's edge. The official record states that he returned willingly and resumed his work. But the unofficial story, the one the artisans whispered, was far darker. They said Alessandro vanished into a chamber beneath the palace where the Council of 10 conducted interrogations. After 3 days, he was released with his hands intact, but his spirit drained. He worked for several more months, quieter and slower, until one morning he walked into the furnace chamber before sunrise and never walked out again. Some said the fire took him. Others said he chose it. But the message was clear. Knowledge was power, and power in Venice was not the right of the individual. It belonged to the Republic. Yet, despite the tragedies, Murano continued to flourish creatively because the artisans had internalized a philosophy that shaped every decision they made. They believed that certain knowledge must remain rare to remain powerful, that beauty created in secret carries a different weight than beauty displayed openly. That mastery is sacred only when protected, and this belief that secrecy preserves value became the invisible foundation upon which Venice built its economic moat. What made Murano's alchemists so feared, so coveted, and so profoundly misunderstood was not simply their ability to create beautiful objects. It was the way they reshaped Europe's relationship with light, perception, and luxury itself. Their work transformed how kings displayed power, how merchants signaled wealth, and how scholars understood the world through lenses that magnified the invisible. But beneath these cultural revolutions lay something deeper, something far less visible, a philosophy of secrecy refined over centuries until it became indistinguishable from the craft. Every master knew that the greater the secret, the heavier the burden of protecting it. And so Murano embraced rituals of privacy that bordered on the ceremonial. Before an artisan began crafting a new mixture for cristallo, he would bolt the workshop doors and seal the windows with cloth soaked in seawater to block both heat and sound. Apprentices were instructed never to look directly into the master's crucible unless invited. Some families kept their furnace temperatures hidden, known only to the patriarch and a single chosen heir. This obsession with concealment did not arise solely from fear of foreign theft. It emerged from a cultural belief that knowledge loses its vitality when exposed too freely. To the artisans of Murano, secrecy was not a strategy. It was a way of honoring their lineage. The philosophy became embedded in the structure of the island itself. The narrow alleys seemed designed to mislead strangers. Workshops were arranged so that no outsider could observe the full process from start to finish. Even the furnaces were positioned strategically, allowing certain techniques to be shielded from view by stone partitions or by the arrangement of tools. And the artisans moved with grace through these shadows, navigating the hidden architecture of their world with the ease of men who had never known another life. Yet, despite the labyrinth of barriers, rumors leaked across Europe like faint reflections on water. Stories of secret powders imported discreetly from the Levant. Tales of masters who claimed to sense impurities through touch alone. Whispers that Murano glass contained properties that defied natural explanation. One particularly persistent rumor, originating from the court of King Sigismund of Poland, claimed that a Murano chalice had been tested by filling it with heated wine, and that the glass remained perfectly cool to the touch. Another rumor circulating in Prague suggested that Murano artisans had discovered a formula that produced lenses capable of revealing flaws in gemstones. Even if exaggerated, these tales amplified Murano's aura and made its glass an object of near-mythic desire. Foreign powers took these rumors seriously. In Prague, Emperor Rudolf II, known for his fascination with alchemy and the occult, sent envoys disguised as merchants to gain entry into Murano's workshops. In Paris, Catherine de' Medici quietly funded attempts to smuggle Murano artisans into France through coded correspondence routed through Florence. The Ottoman Empire, long fascinated with Venetian trade, sought to establish its own glassmaking center and reportedly attempted to bribe several masters with silk, jewels, and land. Even England, late to the game of luxury industries, made clandestine offers to Murano workers during the reign of Elizabeth IV, hoping to break its dependence on foreign imports. Some of these attempts succeeded. A handful of artisans, driven by ambition or desperation, managed to escape. The most famous was a master known as Antonio da Conti, who fled to the Holy Roman Empire around the year 1612. His defection sparked panic within Venice. The Council of Ten dispatched a small fleet north under the guise of diplomatic duty, but everyone understood their true mission. Da Conti vanished from public record shortly after their arrival. Some said he was persuaded to return with promises of forgiveness. Others believed he was eliminated quietly, buried in foreign soil. But there was also a story whispered only among Murano's oldest families, that Da Conte lived out his days in a remote village under an assumed name, unable to replicate the magic he once possessed because he no longer had the island, the furnaces, or the lineage that shaped him. That story, true or not, captured a truth the world often missed. Murano's strength was not merely in formulas or techniques, but in the environment that nurtured them. The furnaces themselves had personalities honed through centuries of use. The air of the lagoon carried minerals and moisture that subtly influenced the mixtures. The artisans worked with a rhythm shaped by generations of practice, habit, and psychology. Knowledge stolen from Murano rarely produced the same results elsewhere, not because of missing ingredients, but because the intangible spirit of the island could not be transplanted. And so Murano endured. While rivals rose and fell, while kings schemed and spies infiltrated, the island continued its alchemical dance with fire. The masters understood that the world chased their secrets because the world misunderstood them. What outsiders wanted was a formula. What made Murano powerful was not a formula. It was a philosophy, the belief that knowledge, when kept sacred, becomes a form of dominion. This philosophy became the cornerstone of Venice's economic strategy. The Republic understood that in a world driven by trade, those who controlled the irreplaceable controlled the terms of exchange. Murano's glass was not simply sold. It was leveraged. It was used to negotiate treaties, secure alliances, and elevate Venice's standing among nations who possessed armies far larger and territories far greater. The artisans, for all their confinement, became the silent architects of Venice's wealth. Centuries later, when economists study monopolies, they speak of patents, barriers to entry, and trade secrets. But long before these concepts had modern names, Murano embodied them intuitively. The artisans did not study economic theory. They lived it. Their secrecy created scarcity. Their scarcity created desire. Their desire created power. And through that power, Venice carved its place in the world. The forbidden alchemists of Murano remind us that the greatest economic empires are not built by expanding outward, but by protecting what lies within. Power belongs to the rare. Wealth belongs to the guarded. And the future belongs to those who understand that some knowledge must be treated not as information, but as treasure. There were few institutions in Renaissance Europe spoken of with the same mixture of awe and dread as Venice's Council of Ten. To outsiders, it appeared to be nothing more than a political body, a committee of patricians tasked with matters of state. But to those who lived within the Republic, the Council of Ten was something far older, far darker, and far more powerful than any senate or court. It was the silent heartbeat of Venice's intelligence system. And for the glassmakers of Murano, it was the unseen force that ensured their genius never slipped beyond the lagoon's shimmering borders. The halls of the council were lined with portraits of stern faces and eyes painted with unsettling precision. Every morning, the 10 men met in a chamber lit by a single lantern suspended above a polished map of the Venetian territories. They spoke softly, but their decisions traveled swiftly. Their reach extended from the Doge's palace to the smallest canals, from the merchant fleets to the quiet workshops of Murano. They were not merely lawmakers. They were watchers. The artisans understood this better than anyone. Though the council rarely set foot on the island, their presence was felt everywhere. In the gentle yet persistent questions of a fisherman who always seemed too curious, in the stranger lingering near the docks, pretending to examine boat ropes while listening for conversations, in the sudden disappearance of a courier who had carried a letter from a foreign noble. The Council of Ten moved through Murano like a ghostly tide, unseen but constant, shaping the lives of men who could melt sand into clarity. One of the Council's most enduring tools was the so-called Shadow Registry, a secret list, never written, known only to 3 men at a time. It contained the names of artisans whose skills were considered state-critical. These were the masters who held formulas, techniques, and intuitions that Venice could not afford to lose. The men on this list lived under a different kind of law. Their movements were watched. Their visitors were recorded. Their apprentices were vetted. Some said that even their dreams were monitored, as if the Republic feared that thoughts themselves might find a way to escape. There was a master named Benedetto Fiori who learned firsthand what it meant to be on this silent list. Benedetto came from a modest family with no noble blood and no grand lineage of glassmakers. Yet in his middle years, he developed a method for creating exceptionally thin glass that was both flexible and resilient. It was the closest Europe had ever come to mimicking the properties of Damascus steel, but in glass form. The moment his creation reached the Doge's palace, Benedetto became a man no longer fully belonging to himself. He had no say in the matter. One morning, he awoke to find 2 members of the council waiting outside his workshop. They spoke politely, even respectfully, but their message was unmistakable. Benedetto would continue his work. Benedetto would share his technique with a successor chosen by the council. Benedetto would not travel without permission, and if he ever attempted to communicate his secrets to a foreign power, the lagoon would claim him. Benedetto bowed and accepted. What else could he do? Yet his acceptance did not come from fear alone. Like many artisans before him, he believed that his craft had chosen him. He believed the flame had a will of its own. To protect that flame, even if it meant surrendering freedom, was a burden he accepted as part of his vocation. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, late at night, when he stared at the black waters beyond the island and wondered what his life might have been without the council's shadow. The council's influence shaped Murano in ways few outsiders ever understood. They recognized that innovation, left to wander uncontrolled, could become a weapon in the hands of their rivals. And so they created an entire ecosystem of containment. The council discouraged competition between families in ways that might risk exposure of secrets. They ensured that the best furnaces remained on Murano and did not migrate to Venice proper. They monitored shipments of minerals, sand, ash, and even seawater, guarding against the possibility that an artisan might smuggle out a mixture or experiment with materials beyond the island's control. But the council also protected the artisans. It was they who ordered foreign merchants to be escorted through workshops, ensuring that no prying eyes lingered too long. It was they who negotiated with the Doge to grant glassmakers privileges that lifted them above ordinary citizens. It was they who deployed covert agents to eliminate foreign spies attempting to infiltrate the island. Their surveillance was a form of guardianship, stern, harsh, but oddly paternal. Still, the glassmakers lived with the knowledge that the council's interest could turn dangerous with astonishing speed. If a master improvised a new technique without declaring it, if a family withheld a formula, if an apprentice expressed interest in traveling abroad, the council would appear with questions. Their inquiries were calm but relentless. They asked about visitors, about materials, about conversations overheard in taverns, and sometimes about dreams. One night, the council intervened in a case that became the quiet warning passed from generation to generation. A young artisan named Matteo Erizzo, brilliant, impulsive, and reckless, had been experimenting with colored glass in ways his family disapproved of. He sought brilliance beyond beauty, pushing the limits of materials until he created a shade of deep blue that shone with an almost unnatural intensity. When Matteo brought this piece to a secret meeting with a foreign envoy, the council intercepted him. No one ever discovered how they knew. But every glassmaker on Murano understood the lesson. Nothing remained hidden for long beneath the council's gaze. Venice controlled innovation not by suppressing it, but by channeling it. Every experiment, every breakthrough, every whisper of discovery was funneled through the council's invisible architecture. They allowed creativity to flourish, but they shaped its direction. They harvested potential while eliminating risk. The artisans lived within a system where brilliance was rewarded, but only if it served the state. And in this tightly controlled environment, innovation became not merely a pursuit, but a negotiation between desire and duty. It was in this interplay, this dance between creation and control, that Murano's greatest secrets were forged. And it was here, under the watch of the inquisitors of innovation, that Venice built an economic moat so deep no rival kingdom could cross it. There was an old saying whispered among the artisans of Murano: "The fire tests the glass, but the council tests the man." To those who lived under the Council of Ten's quiet watch, these words were not metaphor. They were instruction. They were warning. They were prophecy. Every artisan knew that the council had methods of uncovering truths that defied ordinary explanation. Some claimed the council had informants hidden in every workshop, disguised as servants, dock workers, or even apprentices. Others believed more mystical versions. They whispered that the council had access to astrologers who read the stars for signs of betrayal, or that they possessed secret devices from the East capable of amplifying sound so they could eavesdrop from across a room. The most dramatic rumor claimed that the council employed a brotherhood of listeners, men trained from childhood to memorize overheard conversations with perfect accuracy, able to recall a whisper months later as if it were spoken moments ago. The truth was less magical, but far more effective. Venice's intelligence network was so deeply woven into daily life that deception became nearly impossible. On Murano, the council did not need spies hidden in shadows. The island itself became the spy. The close-knit community, bound by shared heritage and fear, served as a living web of observation. A master might keep a secret close to his chest, but an apprentice could see the tremor of excitement in his hands when he discovered something new. A merchant might carry news of foreign interest, but a sailor overhearing the conversation at the tavern would repeat it to a cousin who worked for the Doge. Information flowed through the island like heat radiating from the furnaces, unseen but palpable. This environment created a complex psychology among the artisans. On one hand, they trusted their fellow craftsmen more than anyone else in the world. On the other hand, they learned to guard their inner thoughts with disciplined silence. A man who spoke impulsively, who revealed a desire to travel or an interest in foreign courts, risked drawing attention he did not want. It became a survival skill to let passion show only when safe, to let ambition burn only behind closed doors. The deeper truth was that the council wanted innovation, but they feared innovation unbound. They understood that a single breakthrough, if carried to the wrong city, could shift economic power across Europe. And so, their role evolved into something paradoxical. They were protectors of genius and jailers of possibility. They nurtured brilliance while preventing it from leaving the nest. They encouraged experimentation as long as its fruits remained under Venetian control. This balance was fragile, and sometimes it faltered. There was a case recorded in the private log of a council member, a document discovered centuries later in a sealed drawer beneath the palace. The entry described an artisan named Tommaso Gradenigo, who had developed a technique for producing mirror glass without distortion, something so precise that it surpassed even the polished metal mirrors used by noble courts. When the council learned of his discovery, they summoned him to the palace for questioning. Tommaso arrived confident, believing his work would earn him wealth and honor. Instead, he was met with a cold reception. The council informed him that Venice would take ownership of the formula, rewarding him modestly, but firmly preventing him from sharing it. They also asked him to train 2 apprentices selected by the council. Tommaso resisted. He argued that the technique was his creation and that he deserved the right to decide its fate. The council listened in silence. Then, with the calmness of men accustomed to making irreversible decisions, they declared Tommaso a security threat. He was stripped of his workshop and placed under house arrest on a smaller island nearby. The official records say he died peacefully 2 years later. The artisans of Murano told a different story. They said Tommaso slowly lost his sanity, not from imprisonment, but from the knowledge that his innovation, his life's work, had been swallowed by the state and buried in secrecy. Stories like Tommaso's became warnings passed across generations. They taught young artisans the delicate art of navigating ambition under surveillance. They taught masters that innovation was not merely a matter of creation, but of self-control. And they taught every man on Murano that the council's power was absolute, not because it punished, but because it predicted. The council rarely intervened after a betrayal. They intervened before. This was the heart of their philosophy. Control the future by mastering the present, and let fear do the rest. And yet, beneath this stern governance lived a subtler truth. The Council of Ten, in their unyielding vigilance, preserved the very conditions that made Murano's innovations possible. The isolation they enforced gave artisans time and focus unmatched anywhere else. The fear they constructed prevented destructive competition. The privileges they granted elevated the glassmakers to a social class that encouraged pride, identity, and continuity. The council created a paradoxical environment where artisans were both constrained and empowered, pressured and protected, imprisoned and exalted. This paradigm, this delicate balance of liberty and control, became the backbone of Murano's generational mastery. And as strange as it sounds, it is a paradigm that continues to shape empires, companies, and fortunes even today. In the modern world, we call this structure by another name: governance, the unseen framework that allows innovation to flourish without collapsing into chaos. The structure that keeps secrets protected, channels talent, and ensures that breakthroughs become assets rather than liabilities. What Venice understood intuitively, modern institutions spend billions to replicate. And it began here, in the flickering firelight of Murano, in the silent footsteps of the inquisitors of innovation. The artisans of Murano lived under a strange truth. Their brilliance was desired by the world, yet their movements were restricted by law. Their creations dazzled courts from Lisbon to Krakow, yet their names were spoken only quietly, often in fear of drawing the council's scrutiny. Their inventions changed Europe, yet they themselves rarely saw beyond the lagoon. This paradox was not accidental. It was engineered with precision by the Council of Ten, who understood a principle that modern strategists still struggle to grasp. Innovation without containment is chaos. Creativity without structure is vulnerable. A breakthrough shared too widely becomes diluted, imitated, or stolen. The council's genius lay not only in guarding the artisans, but in creating a psychological environment where innovation could flourish while remaining safely enclosed. Yet, despite the council's careful orchestration, the pressure sometimes reached a breaking point. One of the most haunting stories passed down through Murano families concerned a master named Pietro Aretusi. Pietro was a quiet man with a sharp mind and an unusual gift. He had a perfect internal sense of temperature. He could judge the exact heat of a furnace simply by watching the way the flames curled around the glass. Because of this, his pieces were flawless. His mirrors showed no warping. His bowls rang with a clarity that startled visitors. And his glass beads, small, deceptively simple objects, were prized along trade routes that stretched into Africa and the Middle East. But Pietro carried a flaw. He possessed a restless curiosity that pushed him toward boundaries the council wanted untouched. He experimented not only with glass, but with the metals that interacted with it. He collected substances brought by sailors from far-off coasts. He studied the writings of natural philosophers. And at night, when Murano slept, Pietro conducted experiments that produced colors and textures unseen before in European glassmaking. A merchant from the Papal States, recognizing Pietro's talent, began offering him money, land, and protection in exchange for leaving the Republic. Pietro refused repeatedly, but the merchant persisted. Eventually, worn thin by years of confinement and tempted by what lay beyond the lagoon, Pietro agreed to meet the merchant in secret. What happened next became legend. The council intercepted the merchant before he reached Murano. Pietro, unaware of this, went to the meeting place, a small storage shed near the edge of the canal. Inside, he found not the merchant, but 3 men dressed as ordinary laborers. They spoke politely. They asked him about a shipment of sand he had ordered. They asked him about his experiments. Then their questions became sharper. Their tone shifted. Pietro realized too late who they were. The next morning, the artisans found Pietro's workshop sealed with wax. That evening, a quiet proclamation was read aloud in the main square, stating that Pietro had fallen ill and retired from his duties. The island understood. Florence understood. Rome understood. Anyone who heard those words understood. The council never punished openly. Their punishments were whispered into existence. They allowed the silence to grow until it became truth. Pietro's fate served as a reminder. Innovation was allowed only within the boundaries of the state, and those boundaries were drawn in stone. But for every story of punishment, there were stories of protection. The council often acted as the invisible shield of Murano, intercepting foreign agents, manipulating diplomatic channels, and ensuring that Venice retained control of the luxury trade. They negotiated privileges for the artisans, including the right to marry into noble families, a stunning elevation for craftsmen. They exempted glassmakers from certain taxes, provided them with legal protections, and even granted them the rare right to carry swords. These privileges were not generosity. They were calculated tools of control and reward. But they also bestowed upon the artisans a sense of identity and pride that fueled their commitment to their craft. This merging of control and privilege shaped a powerful psychological environment. The artisans were isolated, yet honored, contained, yet elevated, bound, yet empowered. The duality created a fierce loyalty to the island, to the furnaces, and even to the council itself. The artisans came to believe that their captivity was a necessary cost for preserving the purity of their craft. They accepted that some knowledge must never leave the lagoon. And this acceptance transformed Murano from a place of oppression into a crucible of mastery. The philosophy underlying this phenomenon can be distilled into a single truth. Constraints, when intentional, create mastery. The council did not merely imprison the artisans, they created a system in which focus, discipline, and secrecy combined into generational excellence. Their surveillance reduced distractions. Their scrutiny filtered out recklessness. Their privileges rewarded loyalty. Their punishments discouraged betrayal. And in this ecosystem, innovation thrived with astonishing productivity. This is the heart of the Inquisitor's philosophy. Mastery requires guardianship. A modern reader might be tempted to see the Council of Ten as tyrants, but from the perspective of Venetian strategy, they were stewards of national destiny. They preserved a monopoly that filled the Republic's coffers. They nurtured an industry that defined Venice's cultural identity, and they created a power structure that protected the artisans from foreign exploitation. This ancient philosophy holds astonishing relevance in the realm of modern finance. Today, the Council's methods are echoed in the way corporations build and maintain economic moats. Patents act as legal constraints. Confidentiality agreements serve as psychological constraints. Governance structures channel innovation and prevent destructive chaos. Companies build walls around their intellectual property, just as Venice built walls around Murano. They control knowledge flow as tightly as the council monitored artisans. They cultivate internal cultures that reward loyalty and punish leakage. Innovation without protection creates competitors. Innovation with guardianship creates empires. This is the financial lesson the inquisitors of innovation carved into history. Guard your advantage. Sharpen it. Contain it. Let it mature behind walls strong enough to withstand envy, theft, and imitation. Venice understood that knowledge is not most valuable when shared freely. It is most valuable when refined carefully and revealed only strategically. The Republic did not fear competition because it controlled every step of the innovation pipeline, from the raw materials to the hands that shaped them to the political apparatus that guarded their secrets. This is how a small republic, without a vast army, built an empire that influenced the world. And it happened because the Council of Ten understood a timeless truth. Innovation creates wealth. Protection preserves it. But governance multiplies it. There are moments in history when a material, so deceptively fragile, reshapes the destiny of nations. And among these silent shapers, few had the power of glass. Yet the glass of Murano was not merely a luxury. It was an instrument that altered perception, extended human vision, and unlocked discoveries that would change the world forever. Behind every polished lens, every gleaming mirror, every crystalline vessel, stood the invisible hands of artisans who never set foot beyond their island. And because of them, Europe began to see differently, quite literally. Long before Galileo pointed a telescope toward the heavens, Murano's masters crafted lenses with a clarity unmatched anywhere else. Their cristallo, flawless and luminous, became the foundation upon which optical devices were built. In dim workshops illuminated by the glow of the furnaces, artisans shaped glass in ways that would eventually open the doors of the universe. The irony was profound. Men confined by water and decree created the tools that would reveal the infinite expanses of the cosmos. One of the earliest stories that hinted at this transformation involved a little-known glassmaker named Toma Leoncini. He worked quietly, avoiding the attention that often followed more famous masters. Toma had a peculiar fascination with magnification. He would shape small spheres of glass late at night, holding them to candlelight and observing how flame distorted into shifting halos. His apprentices thought him eccentric. His family dismissed his fascination as a harmless quirk. Yet Toma understood something they did not. He believed that magnifying glass was not a toy or a novelty. It was a frontier. Venetian merchants traveling to the east brought back stories of scholars in Cairo using small glass beads to study manuscripts. Toma became obsessed with perfecting these beads. He crafted them smaller, thinner, more precise. Some were so perfectly rounded that a drop of water perched on them like a second lens. These tiny objects, seemingly insignificant, found their way into the hands of Italian scholars who used them to examine insects, plants, and early printed texts. They became the precursors to the devices that later revealed the existence of cells, microbes, and the hidden architecture of life. But it was the mirror glass of Murano that became the true catalyst for transformation. Before the artisans perfected their techniques, mirrors were crude metal surfaces that warped faces into grotesque caricatures. Murano's innovators, through a mixture of skill and secret processes, created mirror glass so smooth it returned the world with exact, almost unsettling accuracy. For the first time, Europe saw its own face clearly. Portraits changed. Architecture changed. Even the way people perceived identity shifted. A clear reflection was not just a tool. It was a revelation. It was this same mirror glass that eventually traveled into the hands of scientists who needed precision instruments. Lenses created from cristallo were so pure that scholars began grinding them into shapes that could bend light with remarkable precision. And it was here that history took an extraordinary turn. A merchant from Venice once carried Murano lenses to the port city of Pisa. He sold them to a local instrument maker named Paolo Sarpi, who then passed them along to an ambitious scholar named Galileo Galilei. Galileo was not the first to experiment with magnifying lenses. Nor was he the first to construct a rudimentary telescope. But he was the first to possess lenses crafted from Murano glass, lenses whose purity allowed him to see the moons orbiting Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and the imperfections on the lunar surface. Galileo's discoveries shook the foundations of Europe. They challenged the Church, transformed astronomy, and rewrote humanity's place in the cosmos. And yet, the men responsible for those revelations lived quietly on an island they could never leave, unaware that their hands had sparked a conflict between science and dogma. It is one of history's quietest ironies that Murano, a place governed by secrecy and confinement, became the birthplace of scientific clarity. The artisans who shaped the lenses did not see the stars through them. They did not know that their work would spark revolutions in thought, medicine, and navigation. They simply refined their craft, pursuing perfection with an intensity that bordered on devotion. But while these transformations unfolded across Europe, a quiet truth remained concealed beneath the surface. Murano did not create these wonders merely through talent or opportunity. It created them through a disciplined philosophy, a belief that great innovation requires silence, slowness, and the patient shaping of raw material into revelation. For the scholars who held Murano's lenses in their hands, the experience was nothing short of revelation. But for the men who crafted those lenses, the work was far more intimate. It was a dialogue with fire, a meditation etched into molten clarity. They never imagined themselves as participants in the great unfolding of science. They believed they were shaping delicate beauty for nobles and merchants. Yet history had other plans. The evolution of Murano's optical craft did not unfold in the grand halls of palaces, but in the dim, overheated stillness of workshops where masters labored with meticulous patience. Among the most enigmatic of these masters was a man named Angelo Busanello, whose work never appeared in official Venetian records, but whose lenses traveled farther than those of any other artisan in his time. Angelo had a rare trait, an almost painful sensitivity to visual imperfection. He could detect the slightest distortion in a finished lens simply by watching how sunlight refracted through it. Apprentices said that Angelo could see flaws invisible to the human eye, flaws that only revealed themselves when magnified many times over. Angelo's obsession led him to conduct bizarre experiments. He would heat glass for hours, cooling it rapidly, then reheating it again, claiming that the repeated cycle purified its memory. Others mocked him for this, yet his lenses achieved a clarity that scholars later described as supernatural. One piece, purchased by a German merchant, was brought to the city of Leiden, where the scientist Antoni van Leeuwenhoek used it decades later to reveal the existence of microscopic life. The artisan on Murano never knew that his dedication had opened an entirely new dimension of the natural world. He died on the island, buried beside the furnaces that had shaped his life, unaware that the first glimpses of microbes, creatures no human had ever seen, were illuminated through his work. Even outside the realm of science, Murano glass altered the world in quieter, more intimate ways. In the courts of France, mirrors imported from Murano became symbols of sophistication and power. When Louis XIV constructed his famous Hall of Mirrors, the Venetians knew the stakes. The French sent envoys to lure artisans away from the island, offering wealth and safety. One artisan escaped. His name was Pietro Bortolo, a gifted yet anxious craftsman who dreamed of a life free from the weight of secrets. He fled to France under the protection of Colbert, the finance minister of Louis XIV. His arrival changed the course of European industry. For the first time, Venice's monopoly cracked. The French built mirror factories. Murano's dominance in mirror production began to wane. Yet even this defection revealed an important truth. The techniques Pietro carried were incomplete. What he gave France was powerful, but not the full secret. Murano's supremacy had never rested on formulas alone. It rested on the unity of environment, lineage, and philosophy, a culture shaped as carefully as the glass itself. Still, the ripples of disruption traveled far. Murano's artisans felt the tremors. They began innovating more aggressively, creating new colored glasses, developing advanced chandeliers, experimenting with forms and textures that had never been seen before. It was as if, sensing the first signs of external competition, the island's spirit awakened with renewed intensity. Constraint had made them masters. Pressure made them creators. One little-known figure who emerged during this period was Lucia Zeno, the daughter of a master who died unexpectedly of illness. Women were forbidden from becoming official glassmakers, but Lucia refused to let her family's lineage end. She worked in secret, shaping glass under the guidance of her uncle after the furnaces dimmed for the night. Her work was extraordinary, delicate but sturdy, infused with subtle color gradients that resembled dawn rising through mist. Some claimed that visiting dignitaries unknowingly purchased Lucia's pieces, believing them to be the work of her uncle. Lucia's story reveals a deeper truth about Murano. The craft belonged to the community, not merely the men who stood before the furnaces. Families carried fragments of knowledge. Wives mixed ash. Daughters polished and inspected finished pieces. Mothers whispered family secrets that were never written. The craft lived not only in the flames, but in the bloodlines and bonds of the island. This communal heritage was part of what made Murano extraordinary. Innovations emerged not from isolated geniuses, but from generations refining each other's efforts, polishing methods as carefully as they polished glass. Every new breakthrough was born of centuries of quiet, disciplined effort. And that effort reshaped Europe's relationship with light itself. But beneath the beauty, behind the shimmering surfaces and the scientific revelations, lay a truth few recognized. Murano's power came from its philosophy of refinement. It was not enough to invent. One had to perfect. One had to remove the noise, the impurities, the distractions, until only clarity remained. This philosophy, born from the furnaces, seeped into every aspect of the island's culture. And it was this philosophy of refinement, not wealth, not privilege, not law, that ultimately gave Murano its greatest influence. For refinement is slow, it is quiet, it is deliberate, but it transforms the world more deeply than any sudden invention. If Murano had given Europe a new way to see the world through clarity and magnification, it had also created something even more radical, a new way to imagine the future. Because once a society begins to see what was previously invisible, whether the moons of Jupiter, the veins on a leaf, or its own face reflected without distortion, it can never return to the blindness that came before. Murano did not simply craft glass. It crafted vision itself. This transformation unfolded slowly, almost imperceptibly, in the daily lives of people who had never heard of the island. In the early 17th century, physicians began using Murano lenses to examine wounds with precision. Apothecaries used them to inspect herbs and minerals for impurities. Goldsmiths adopted small magnifying globes to perfect their intricate designs. Even scribes used them to inspect the alignment of type, making the printing revolution more accurate and accessible. Glass did not merely serve luxury. It became an essential tool for craftsmanship across countless fields. But nowhere did Murano's influence manifest more dramatically than in navigation. Venetian glassmakers supplied lenses for astrolabes, compasses, and early navigational instruments. These devices allowed sailors to chart courses with greater confidence, enabling them to brave longer journeys and more treacherous seas. The age of exploration owes part of its momentum to the precision Murano could coax from molten sand. In ways few recognized at the time, the furnaces of Murano shaped the map of the world. One man who understood this better than most was the sailor-turned-cartographer Matteo Sanudo. Matteo had been raised on Murano, the son of a modest bead maker. As a boy, he had watched his father shape tiny beads used in trade with West Africa. Each bead seemed insignificant, yet Matteo saw how merchants prized them, how whole caravans accepted Murano beads as currency. Beads became tribute in distant kingdoms. They became diplomatic gifts, ritual ornaments, even components in ancient ceremonies along the Niger River. That a piece of glass from Murano could command such influence amazed the young Matteo. When Matteo later became a sailor, he recognized something others overlooked. The instruments guiding ships across oceans often contained pieces of Murano glass, the same craft his father practiced. Lenses refined on an island most sailors had never visited were helping ships navigate storms, chart unknown coasts, and cross expanses once deemed impossible. As Matteo studied the world, he wrote in his diary that Murano does not know the borders it has shattered. Those words became famous centuries later, discovered in a collection of documents housed in the Doge's palace. Yet even as Murano's creations spread across continents, the artisans themselves remained largely unaware of their influence. A master shaping a lens might think he was crafting a simple tool for a scholar in Padua, not realizing that the same lens would guide explorers toward lands no European had ever seen. The artisans felt the weight of secrecy, but seldom understood the weight of impact. Their world was bounded by water, yet their creations flowed far beyond the horizon. But as Murano glass reshaped global exploration and scientific inquiry, it also redefined European society on a more intimate level. Mirrors became symbols of status and power. They appeared in royal chambers, noble halls, and merchant homes. Their clarity invited introspection and vanity alike. For the first time, people saw themselves with accuracy, without the warping distortions of polished metal mirrors. This clarity began influencing art. Portrait painters adjusted their techniques, striving to capture realistic proportions and subtle expressions revealed by Murano glass. Fashion shifted as people became more aware of their appearance. Even court etiquette evolved in response to this new presence of self-observation. All of this, navigation, science, art, medicine, self-perception, emerged from molten sand shaped by men who lived under confinement. Yet Murano's enduring power was not found in any single invention or breakthrough. It was found in their mastery of a principle as old as craft itself: transformation through precision. What separated Murano from every rival was its refusal to settle for approximation. Perfection was not a goal. It was a duty. And that duty shaped every choice they made, from the purity of the ash they imported from the Levant to the precise timing of cooling cycles that turned fragile strands into crystalline marvels. This relentless pursuit of refinement holds a lesson for anyone seeking mastery today. Greatness is not achieved through sudden inspiration. It is achieved through patient distillation, removing the unnecessary, polishing the essential, and refining the remainder until only clarity remains. The artisans of Murano did not chase speed or novelty. They cultivated depth. They shaped the invisible. And because of that, their work outlived empires. It was this philosophy of refinement that also formed the invisible foundation of Venice's financial strength. Murano's glass was not merely a commodity. It was a moat, an economic fortress built on secrets, excellence, and scarcity. Other cities could produce glass. Only Murano could produce revelation. And because the artisans protected their methods fiercely, the Republic enjoyed centuries of dominance in a market that touched courts, laboratories, workshops, and voyages alike. Thus, Murano's story teaches us that true wealth is built not on the abundance of ordinary goods, but on the scarcity of extraordinary ones. The world does not reward what everyone can replicate. It rewards what few can imagine, and even fewer can execute. Murano understood this deeply, long before economists gave such phenomena a name, and so the island continued to burn under the watch of its furnaces, shaping the lenses through which humanity would discover its world and itself. There are moments in history when the pursuit of knowledge becomes a hunt, when genius becomes prey, and when the line between admiration and abduction blurs into something dangerous. For centuries, Murano glowed like a beacon across Europe, a small island radiating the brilliance of its furnaces. And wherever brilliance shines, shadows grow. By the late 15th century, a clandestine market began to form across the courts of Europe. It did not trade in gold, spices, or cloth. It traded in people. More precisely, it traded in glassmakers, those rare custodians of secrets that no kingdom could replicate without blood or betrayal. Kings, dukes, and merchant lords wanted Murano's knowledge. And when Venice refused to share it, they sought other means. Whispers spread through the taverns of Florence, the salons of Paris, the merchant halls of Augsburg. Word traveled that certain nobles would pay small fortunes for an artisan who could craft cristallo, mirror glass, or gold-infused chalices. These nobles knew that one master, just one, could disrupt Venice's monopoly and shift an entire trade economy. And so began what the Venetians later called il mercato delle ombre, the shadow market. Foreign envoys disguised their intentions behind diplomacy. A prince might send gifts to Murano, a bolt of silk, a silver goblet, or a Persian carpet, then quietly inquire which glassmakers had sons eager for adventure or debts they needed to escape. An ambassador from the Holy Roman Empire once hosted lavish feasts in Venice, where he deliberately seated Murano artisans beside influential guests from Prague, hoping ambition would take root. In France, agents of the crown visited Venetian merchants under the pretense of negotiating trade treaties, but in private, they asked a different question. Could any Murano master be convinced to defect? Venice, of course, was not naive. The Republic understood that temptation was a more effective weapon than armies. And so, the Council of Ten intensified their surveillance. Letters addressed to artisans were opened discreetly before reaching their doors. Strangers offering suspiciously generous wages were followed. Foreign ships anchored near Murano were inspected with unnecessary thoroughness. The island became an ecosystem of vigilance, where trust was a luxury and secrecy a means of survival. Despite this, the human spirit, when pressed, seeks cracks in the walls surrounding it. And so, a few artisans, lonely, ambitious, or desperate, began to contemplate the impossible. Among the earliest defectors was a master named Calcedonio Vigano, a man whose life reads like a tragedy written in glass. Calcedonio was gifted, restless, and fiercely intelligent. But unlike many of his peers, he harbored a resentment toward the island's confinement. He believed that mastery belonged to the individual, not the state. He longed to travel, to be celebrated beyond the lagoon, to leave behind the suffocating watch of the council. When a foreign agent approached him with a promise of freedom and gold, Calcedonio listened. Under the cover of darkness, he boarded a vessel bound for the port of Marseille. The journey was long and dangerous, but Calcedonio made it. He presented himself to the French court and offered his knowledge in exchange for protection. Records show that the French were ecstatic. They installed him in a private workshop, surrounded him with assistants, and granted him a salary that exceeded what many nobles earned. Yet something strange happened. Despite his freedom, despite the lavish conditions and the best materials, Calcedonio could not replicate the glass of Murano. His first batches were fragile. The second were cloudy. The furnaces did not burn with the same temperament. The ash was different. The humidity different. The rhythm of the workshop lacked the cadence he had known since childhood. Calcedonio tried endlessly, but his best works paled in comparison to the least of Murano's. The French praised him publicly, but grew irritated privately. They had purchased a legend, but received a ghost of one. Months later, the Council of Ten sent a message, silent, unmistakable. A Venetian merchant traveling through Marseille found Calcedonio drowned in a shallow fountain, his hands untouched, his eyes wide open, as though still watching the island he betrayed. The French claimed it was an accident. The Venetians did not correct them. Murano whispered only one thing: no man carried the spirit of the island within him. The furnaces did. Yet not every defector met such a fate. Some lived long enough to reveal how fragile Venice's monopoly truly was. Antonio Bon, one of the most talented artisans of the early 16th century, orchestrated a daring escape that shocked the entire Republic. Unlike others, Antonio planned meticulously. He memorized formulas, rehearsed his route, and secured the help of a Dutch merchant eager to break Venice's control of the luxury trade. Antonio disappeared during a night storm, navigating a small skiff through waters most sailors refused to cross. When the council awoke to news of his disappearance, panic spread through the palace corridors. Antonio reached Amsterdam, a rising power hungry for innovation. There, he established a workshop funded by wealthy merchants who saw him as a weapon capable of undermining Venice. And unlike Calcedonio, Antonio succeeded. His furnace was meticulously built, his materials imported from Italy, his assistants trained with precision. Slowly, Amsterdam began producing glass that rivaled Murano's. The Venetian monopoly trembled. This single escape, this lone act of defiance, changed the course of European commerce. Suddenly, governments realized that stealing a master was more valuable than funding armies. Knowledge became the currency of conquest. Murano was forced to innovate more rapidly, striving to stay ahead of the techniques now leaking into foreign lands. The council increased its restrictions, families tightened their secrecy, and the shadow market expanded. But there is a deeper truth hidden in these stories, one that reveals something essential about the psychology of scarcity and control. For every master who fled, dozens stayed. Not because they feared death or punishment, but because the island had become part of their identity. The furnaces were not prisons. They were sanctuaries. The fire was not a chain. It was a companion. Leaving Murano meant leaving themselves. This internal loyalty, the spiritual bond between artisan and craft, was the true force Venice relied upon. The shadow market threatened the Republic's wealth, but it could never fully dismantle the unseen loyalty that burned in the hearts of those who remained. And this fragile balance between loyalty and temptation, between mastery and confinement, became the crucible in which Murano's deepest secrets were forged. The rise of the shadow market did not unfold in blazing daylight or in the grand halls of courts. It unfolded in subtler places, dim taverns, merchant docks, candlelit chambers where nobles whispered ambitions they dared not speak publicly. Europe was shifting. Kingdoms were awakening to the reality that power could be stolen not with armies, but with artisans. Not through conquest, but through knowledge. Venice knew this. It sensed the tremors long before other states understood the game. Yet even the Council of Ten could not anticipate how quickly foreign powers would escalate their ambitions. No longer content with bribery or persuasion, they began weaving networks of spies, intermediaries, and coded letters that snaked across the continent. Murano became the center of a quiet war, a war for mastery of light. One of the most intriguing figures in this clandestine struggle was a Bohemian nobleman known as Count Janos Kriz, a man whose fascination with glass bordered on obsession. Kriz had traveled across Europe collecting exotic pieces, Byzantine mosaics, Roman glass fragments, and Persian bottles. But none captivated him like the work of Murano. When he obtained a single bead of Venetian cristallo through a merchant intermediary, he claimed he could feel the soul of fire trapped within it. His obsession soon became dangerous. Count Kriz began funding a covert network dedicated to luring artisans out of Venice. He operated through intermediaries who posed as wealthy merchants, charming diplomats, and traveling scholars. They studied the habits of Murano's masters, who they spoke to, which taverns they frequented, who among them appeared restless or dissatisfied. They offered tempting opportunities disguised as harmless invitations. A merchant might propose a brief demonstration in a foreign court. A noblewoman might request a private commission that required travel. A traveling scholar might pretend to seek technical advice. And sometimes, the bait worked. The most infamous defection orchestrated by Kriz involved the master Lazzaro Spadavecchia, whose mirrors were so pure they seemed almost alive. Lazzaro was a man haunted by ambition. Unlike many artisans content with the rhythms of Murano, he longed for recognition beyond the lagoon. He dreamed of being known not merely as a master, but as a revolutionary, someone who could shape the very future of the craft. Kriz's network recognized this hunger. They fed it patiently, sending Lazzaro letters praising his genius, offering him rare minerals, inviting him to secret meetings where foreign nobles spoke of him as if he were a legend. And slowly, Lazzaro's resolve weakened. One night, after months of clandestine planning, Lazzaro slipped into a small vessel disguised as a merchant boat. He carried with him only a small chest containing powders and a few tools. The boat glided silently through the lagoon, its oars muffled with cloth. At the edge of the open sea, another ship waited, a Bohemian vessel ready to usher Lazzaro into a world that promised admiration and autonomy. But Venice had anticipated Kriz's scheme. The Council of Ten had been watching Lazzaro for months, tracing the threads of foreign correspondence, intercepting coded messages, following the faint scent of defection. The moment Lazzaro's boat slipped from the lagoon, a Venetian galley moved with terrifying speed. It intercepted the vessel before it reached the open sea. The Bohemian ship vanished beneath the waves. Some said it sank in the struggle. Others whispered it was dragged down deliberately. Lazzaro was taken back to the island. His fate vanished from record. Some claimed he lived under forced house arrest. Some believed he was compelled to work in a hidden workshop. Others said he was quietly eliminated. But the artisans of Murano understood the message. The shadow market was growing, and so was the council's determination. The escalation of foreign attempts forced Venice to confront an uncomfortable truth. Its monopoly was no longer unchallenged. Knowledge wanted to travel. Ambition wanted to breathe. Secrets, no matter how fiercely guarded, strained against their cages. Yet Murano's strength endured because its artisans were bound by something deeper than fear. Their craft had become their identity, their lineage, their pride, their sense of belonging. All of these tied them to the island. A master who fled stepped not only into danger, but into exile from his own soul. This is why the shadow market never fully succeeded. It exploited ambition, but underestimated devotion. It promised luxury, but ignored legacy. It offered freedom, but failed to understand that the greatest freedom for an artisan was mastery, and mastery was inseparable from Murano. The Council of Ten, for all its ruthlessness, understood this far better than foreign powers. It did not merely police the artisans. It nurtured their pride. It fed their sense of purpose. It convinced them that they were custodians of a sacred fire. Venice controlled its monopoly, not through violence alone, but through the psychology of meaning. And meaning, when rooted deeply enough, becomes unbreakable. Meanwhile, the economics of the shadow market became sophisticated in ways Europe had never seen before. Noble courts began investing in secret workshops. Merchant guilds budgeted funds specifically for intelligence operations. Even newly rising cities like Antwerp and Hamburg saw opportunity in the theft of artisans. They understood the staggering profit that could come from producing even a fraction of Murano's quality. The stakes were monumental. A single escaped master could alter a city's economy. A single formula could reroute trade routes. But Venice adapted. It refined its controls. It refined its incentives. And it continued producing innovations faster than rivals could steal them. Murano's monopoly survived not because it was impenetrable, but because it evolved faster than the shadows could keep up. The shadow market, once a whisper across Europe, grew into a clandestine network spanning kingdoms. But as foreign powers expanded their efforts, Venice refined its defenses with equal sophistication. This delicate war fought not with armies, but with minds, secrets, loyalties, and dreams, entered its most dangerous phase. And at its heart were the masters of Murano, men whose very existence became currency in the hands of kings. By the late 16th century, the competition to steal Venetian secrets had become almost ritualistic among the major courts. France, still haunted by its reliance on Murano's mirrors, raised the stakes. Austria sought to undermine Venice's trade advantage. England, newly ascendant under Elizabeth I, considered the capture of a Murano master a national priority. Even the Ottoman Empire, with access to its own glass traditions, recognized the strategic potential of acquiring a Venetian artisan. The shadow market's methods became increasingly bold. Agents hid messages in hollowed-out books, baked them into loaves of bread, embedded them in the lining of coats. They disguised themselves as pilgrims, mercenaries, spice traders. They left coded drawings on canal walls, simple symbols indicating when and where a master could find safe passage. It was a world of quiet signals, invisible battles, and elaborate deceptions. Yet the Council of Ten anticipated these moves with uncanny precision. Their intelligence network, arguably the most advanced in Europe, monitored even the slightest tremor in the fabric of the island's life. A boat lingering too long near a workshop, a foreign merchant asking too many innocent questions, a young apprentice who looked overly fond of adventure. All were catalogued, traced, filed into their invisible archives. Venice kept no written records of sensitive matters, but the Council's memory was long, and its reach vast. It was within this tense atmosphere that one of the most extraordinary and least known episodes in Murano's history unfolded, involving a master named Giovanni Briatti. Giovanni was a prodigy of form and elegance. His chandeliers, composed of twisting arms and delicate flowers that seemed to bloom from air, were marvels that awed even seasoned ambassadors. He possessed a harmonic sense of balance, as though he could hear the glass sing before it was shaped. Because of this, he was a marked man, not only by Venice, who needed him, but by foreign powers who wanted him. The King of Poland sent covert envoys to Venice disguised as musicians. The Dutch Republic attempted to lure Giovanni with the promise of funding an entire workshop solely under his name. Even Russia, still distant from much of European luxury trade, expressed interest in acquiring his talents. But it was France, ever persistent, that orchestrated the boldest attempt. A French noblewoman named Anne de Montreuil arrived in Venice under the guise of admiration for the arts. She visited Giovanni's workshop every few days, expressing a fascination with his chandeliers. Over months, admiration became conversation, and conversation grew into trust. Anne observed what every spy must learn to detect: Giovanni's restlessness. He was brilliant, but he yearned for creative freedom beyond the strictures of the island. He longed to experiment with forms forbidden by Murano's conservative guilds. His hands burned with ideas the island was not ready to accept. Anne saw opportunity. She arranged a boat, secured forged papers, and prepared a route through Genoa. Giovanni hesitated for weeks, torn between loyalty and longing. But one night, after a heated argument with a guild elder who dismissed his new designs as reckless, Giovanni broke. He agreed to leave with Anne. The escape was planned with precision. Giovanni would meet her at midnight near the abandoned salt warehouse. A small boat would carry them to a larger vessel waiting offshore. Everything was ready. Everything except the council. They had known for months. When Giovanni arrived at the warehouse, he saw Anne. He saw the boat. He saw the chance at freedom. But he also saw three silhouettes standing in the shadows. They stepped forward into the moonlight, not with weapons, but with a letter sealed with the mark of the council. They presented him with a decree. Giovanni was forbidden to leave Murano. If he proceeded, he would be declared an enemy of the Republic. He would lose his lineage, his workshop, his family's graves, his name. He stood there, torn between two worlds. Anne begged him to run. The council simply waited. And Giovanni, his hands trembling, stepped backward toward the warehouse wall, then slid down it and wept. He chose the furnace over freedom, the craft over escape, the lineage over ambition, and sailed alone. To some, Giovanni's decision was weakness. To Murano, it was devotion. And to Venice, it was victory. Yet the cost of this victory was something the council had long feared, a fracture in the soul of the artisans. Giovanni continued working, but his fire dimmed. His chandeliers became more delicate, more refined, but also more sorrowful. It was as though each piece carried a whisper of the life he could have lived. Stories like Giovanni's demonstrate the fragile balance between mastery and confinement. The island produced brilliance through pressure, but brilliance comes with dreams, and dreams resist cages. Every master who attempted to flee represented not only a threat to Venice's wealth, but also a reminder of the human limits of enforced loyalty. Still, the shadow market never fully cracked Murano's dominance. It made dense, powerful, sometimes terrifying dents, but it never shattered the core. For even as some artisans left, the culture of the island continued regenerating its secrets through discipline, ritual, and inheritance. And beneath the human drama, a deeper pattern was forming, one that carried profound implications for the world of commerce. Foreign powers believed that if they acquired a master, they acquired the monopoly. But what they discovered, again and again, was that Murano's true strength did not lie in a single artisan. It lay in the collective, the shared identity, the unbroken lineage of practice, the environment shaped by generations of psychological discipline. The Council of Ten understood this. Other nations did not. Stealing a master did not give you Murano. Stealing a master gave you a shadow of Murano. And it is here that the financial lesson quietly emerges, wrapped in the folds of history. A competitive moat is never the talent of one person. It is the culture, the ecosystem, the rituals, the unwritten codes that shape how that talent behaves. Competitors may steal individuals, they may steal formulas, but they can never steal the environment that makes genius possible. That truth protected Venice longer than any spy, any law, any sword. Long before the modern world coined terms like economic moat, long before business schools taught competitive advantage as a science, there were places, small, fiercely disciplined places, where scarcity and secrecy shaped empires more powerful than armies. Murano was one of them. But it was not alone. Across history, certain crafts, substances, and technologies possessed such rarity, such mastery, that entire civilizations bent themselves around them. These were industries guarded like living deities. Their secrets passed through bloodlines, their techniques hidden behind ritual, myth, and consequence. And though they emerged in distant lands, separated by oceans and centuries, they all discovered the same truth. Control the irreplaceable, and you control the world. Murano's glass monopoly was one luminous example. But the pattern stretched far beyond the lagoon. One of the earliest parallels existed deep within the vast expanse of the Han Dynasty, where something remarkable and strange was created in small, smoke-filled workshops. Han Purple. Han Purple was not just a color. It was a breakthrough of chemistry that should not have existed in the ancient world. a synthetic pigment of radiant intensity made from a mixture of barium, copper, and silica. The technique was so difficult that modern scientists struggled to replicate it even with advanced equipment. And like Murano, the Han artisans kept the formula secret for centuries. They worked under imperial oversight, their knowledge considered state property. The pigment decorated the terracotta warriors, adorned ceremonial vessels, and symbolized imperial authority. Yet when the dynasty fell, the secret vanished with it. The monopoly crumbled because the knowledge lived only in hearts, not in institutions. Another example emerged under very different skies: the Ottoman bowyers of the 15th and 16th centuries. They crafted the composite bow, a weapon of astonishing power, capable of launching arrows farther and with greater force than anything Europe possessed. These bows were made from layers of wood, sinew, and horn, glued together with a resin whose precise composition was known to only a handful of master bowyers. The Ottomans guarded this process with a ferocity that matched Venice itself. A bowyer who revealed the secret-faced death. Yet it was this weapon that allowed the Ottoman armies to dominate battlefields for generations. Their monopoly was not on land, but on technique, and nations collapsed because they underestimated the power of a single guarded craft. Further west, in the halls of Swiss watch guilds, a quieter yet equally potent monopoly grew. Their timepieces became status symbols across Europe, not simply because they were accurate, but because guilds, structured with near-religious discipline, regulated every aspect of production. Techniques were passed within families. Apprentice training was measured not in months, but in decades. Foreigners could not join. Knowledge flowed only through the arteries of tradition. Switzerland's precision today is the lingering echo of a world built on secrecy and impossible standards. And then there was the Dutch spice monopoly, an empire carved not with soldiers, but with ships, charters, and the control of information. The Dutch East India Company manipulated supply, controlled pricing, and relied on private maps guarded as fiercely as military documents. They destroyed rival crops. They executed defectors. They created scarcity through orchestrated violence. It was a monopoly enforced not by artistry, but by ruthless strategy. Yet the pattern was the same. The fewer who controlled the supply, the more powerful they became. These monopolies, Han purple, the Ottoman bow, Swiss timekeeping, Dutch spices, Murano glass, all reveal a universal mechanism. Excellence becomes power only when shielded. Mastery becomes wealth only when contained. And secrets become empires only when protected by fear, loyalty, or law. But what made Murano unique was not simply the secrecy, nor the artistry, nor even the surveillance. It was the emotional architecture of its monopoly. Other monopolies were enforced through violence or brute hierarchy. But Murano's was enforced through identity. The artisans believed they were not merely workers. They believed they were guardians of a lineage older than any crown, older than any empire. They believed the fire itself had chosen them. This belief, this sacred psychology, was something no foreign court could replicate, no matter how many masters they stole. To understand this is to understand why certain monopolies endure for centuries, while others collapse within a generation. A monopoly anchored in resources is temporary. A monopoly anchored in skill is vulnerable. A monopoly anchored in machinery can be copied. But a monopoly anchored in culture, deep, disciplined, inherited culture, becomes unbreakable. Murano's furnaces could be rebuilt elsewhere. Its formulas could be memorized and stolen. Its artisans could be lured or kidnapped. But the culture of Murano, the rituals, the pride, the world-view shaped by isolation and fire, that could not be transplanted. And so, the island endured. Even as foreign nations acquired fragments of Murano's techniques, they never acquired Murano's soul. Their glass lacked the clarity. Their chandeliers lacked the grace. Their mirrors lacked the living brilliance of the originals. They produced objects. Murano produced stories. This is why Murano's monopoly stands among history's great examples of how human beings, when united by shared identity and constrained by deliberate boundaries, can generate excellence at a level unmatched by markets or competition. In this small island, surrounded by water and watched by the unblinking eyes of the council, the artisans built something far larger than any workshop. They built an empire made of absence, the absence of imitation, the absence of leakage, the absence of mediocrity, an empire of scarcity, an empire of mastery, an empire protected not by walls, but by belief. And in that empire, the furnaces burned like beating hearts, each one a reminder that in a world obsessed with expansion and conquest, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is guard what you have, and refuse to let it escape. If Murano taught the world how mastery thrives under constraint, its counterparts across history revealed how fragile even the mightiest monopolies can become when their culture falters. Each monopoly, no matter how dominant, stood on an invisible foundation, shared purpose, disciplined secrecy, and the belief that the craft was more than labor. It was identity. It was destiny. And when that belief weakened, the empire around it trembled. One of the clearest examples of this came from the Ottoman bowyers. For centuries, their composite bows were unmatched, capable of feats European archers considered impossible. There are stories of Ottoman archers sending arrows across rivers and striking targets at distances that seemed mythical. European spies tried for generations to steal the bowyer's secrets. They copied the shape, the layering, the materials, but the results were always weaker, more brittle, less precise. What the Ottomans understood, but their rivals never grasped, was that the weapon was not merely crafted. It was cultivated. The sinew used in the bows had to be seasoned for years in humidity-controlled rooms. The horn was treated with oils whose formulas were passed only through specific families. Even the glue, a sticky resin derived from fish and herbs, required rituals during preparation. It was mastery woven through generations. But as the Ottoman Empire declined, so too did its bow-making culture. Young men no longer wanted to apprentice for decades under stern masters. The guilds weakened, standards slipped, and slowly the monopoly dissolved. Not because the secrets were stolen, but because the community that upheld them no longer existed. The craft died not by force, but by indifference. The same fate befell Han Purple. When the Qin and Han dynasties fell, Political upheaval shattered the networks of artisans who held the pigment's formula. Workshops were burned. Masters were displaced. Apprentices fled. And because the craft was never documented in writing, it vanished entirely. For 2 millennia, the world could only speculate about how the ancient Chinese had produced a pigment so chemically sophisticated it challenged modern scientists. Here again, the monopoly collapsed not through theft, but through the destruction of culture. Contrast this with Switzerland. The Swiss watch guilds, though secretive, did something revolutionary. They built a monopoly based not only on secrecy, but on institutional continuity. When one master died, his knowledge was not lost. It was absorbed by the guild, preserved through structure rather than lineage. Apprenticeships lasted decades. Standards were codified. The culture did not rely on a single family or generation, but on a unified identity that transcended individual lives. This allowed Switzerland to maintain its dominance even through wars, political upheavals, and global shifts in trade. Murano lived somewhere between these worlds. Its longevity came from a hybrid system, part lineage, part institution, part psychological architecture. The council enforced discipline. The families preserved techniques. The island itself created the emotional environment of belonging. But Murano also contained seeds of vulnerability. It relied heavily on the belief that artisans would remain loyal. It relied on the containment of ambition. It relied on the absence of internal fracture. These broader historical parallels help reveal a deeper truth. A monopoly is never simply a matter of supply and demand. It is a matter of culture and control. Culture is what sustains excellence. Control is what protects it. Remove either one, and the structure collapses. The Dutch East India Company understood this with ruthless clarity. Their spice monopoly did not endure because they produced better spices. They endured because they controlled the trade routes, the maps, the islands. They relied on violence, surveillance, and manipulation. But their monopoly ultimately collapsed because it lacked a sustainable cultural foundation. Private traders grew resentful. Colonies rebelled. Standards deteriorated. Power built solely on control cannot survive without loyalty, and loyalty cannot exist without shared purpose. This principle applies just as powerfully in the modern world. Today, global corporations build monopolies not through armies, but through code, research, patents, and data. Their competitive advantages lie in algorithms, in user ecosystems, in proprietary technology guarded as fiercely as Murano's secrets. Yet these moats endure only if the internal culture remains aligned. When belief fractures, when standards slip, when secrecy dissolves, even the most dominant company can fall with startling speed. Murano's survival for centuries reveals what these modern giants sometimes forget. A moat is alive. It must be tended, cultivated, maintained. It is not built once. It is built every day through habits, rituals, and decisions that reinforce the identity of the craft. This truth is embodied in a little-known episode from the late 17th century, when Murano faced one of its greatest threats. A new glassmaking center had emerged in Bohemia, powered by forests filled with clean-burning wood and staffed by defected artisans. Bohemian glass was brilliant, affordable, and rapidly gaining favor among European nobles. Venice panicked. The Doge called emergency meetings. Merchants worried that centuries of dominance were slipping. For the first time, Murano's monopoly shook. What saved Murano was not a new law, nor the council's intervention, nor any act of sabotage. What saved Murano was the collective decision of its masters to raise their standards even further. They innovated. They created designs Bohemia could not mimic. They reintroduced ancient techniques that had fallen out of use. They refined their formulas. They poured their entire identity into the fire and emerged stronger than ever. Murano survived because its culture chose excellence over comfort. And that decision, quiet, unseen, born not of fear but of pride, preserved its place in history. This reveals the true nature of an unbreakable monopoly. It is not built upon dominance alone. It is built upon devotion. A devotion to craft, to legacy, to the invisible standards that shape every stroke of skill. That devotion becomes an economy of its own, one that resists imitation because it is not merely practiced. It is lived. It is here that Murano, standing among history's great monopolies, reveals its most timeless lesson. Mastery is not an event. It is a culture. Scarcity is not an accident. It is a choice. And a moat is not a wall around a product. It is a wall around a way of being. The power of a monopoly is not measured by how long it lasts, nor by how wide its influence spreads, but by how deeply it embeds itself into the psyche of those who sustain it. And in Murano, as in the other great monopolies of history, the most important resource was not sand, or ash, or minerals. It was belief. Belief that the craft was sacred. Belief that the lineage was unbroken. Belief that mastery required guardianship. This belief, quiet, unspoken, woven into every generation, was what kept Murano alive through threats that would have shattered any ordinary industry. One of the most revealing episodes occurred during the early 18th century, when the Venetian Republic itself was in decline. Trade routes were shifting. Rival cities were rising. Wars drained the treasury. For the first time, Venice could no longer protect its artisans with its once mighty fleets. Foreign competition grew bolder. Glass from England and Bohemia flooded the markets. Murano's products, once unrivaled, now stood shoulder to shoulder with pieces crafted by men who had never seen the island. The Council of Ten, weakened by political upheaval, could no longer enforce its edicts with the same fearsome precision. Foreign merchants began approaching artisans more brazenly. Some even walked openly on the island, offering bribes with barely concealed arrogance. It should have been the end. But the artisans did something extraordinary. They defended the monopoly themselves. A gathering of masters, quiet, private, held behind locked doors, took place in a workshop belonging to the Uboldi family, one of Murano's oldest lineages. The masters spoke not of law, nor of surveillance, nor of the council's power. They spoke of identity. They spoke of the humiliation of seeing inferior glass passed off as Venetian. They spoke of the responsibility they bore to their ancestors. They spoke of the fire. That night, they made a pact. They agreed to reveal no new techniques to outsiders. They agreed to train apprentices only after rigorous vetting. They agreed to share innovation internally, not competitively. They agreed to raise the standard of their craft beyond anything Bohemia or England could achieve. And most importantly, they agreed that Murano would survive because Murano chose to survive. This gathering became the invisible turning point of the monopoly. The council did not save them. The Republic did not save them. The furnaces did not save them. They saved themselves. This is the nature of an unbreakable monopoly, one that becomes self-protecting, because its culture has become self-aware. Other monopolies learned this lesson the hard way. The Dutch spice monopoly collapsed when its internal governance rotted under corruption. The Han purple monopoly ended when its workshops were destroyed and no cultural structure remained to rebuild them. The Ottoman bow monopoly dissolved when a new generation no longer honored the discipline of their ancestors. Murano, in contrast, survived the fall of its own government. It survived the fragmentation of Venice. It survived the birth of new nations, the rise of new powers, even the advent of modern industry. And it survived because the artisans carried the fire in their minds long after the council's authority faded. In the 19th century, after Napoleon conquered Venice and dismantled many of its ancient institutions, Murano faced extinction once again. The furnaces dimmed. Orders declined. Foreign glassmakers flooded the market with cheaper products. The world no longer revered the island. It saw Murano as a relic. But then, something remarkable happened. Something that mirrors what happens in companies that endure the collapse of the very industries they once dominated. Murano reinvented itself. Glassmakers revived ancient techniques. They created new colors. They transformed traditional chandeliers into elaborate sculptures. They collaborated with contemporary artists. They pivoted from being producers of necessity to being creators of luxury. It was a transformation built not on desperation, but on wisdom. They understood something universal. A monopoly survives not by clinging to the past, but by elevating its difference. This is where the financial lesson of Murano becomes clear. A moat is not a trench around a castle. It is a living organism. It must grow, adapt, breathe, and shed its old skin. Innovation forms the outer walls. Culture forms the inner citadel. And guardianship, active, intentional, disciplined guardianship, is the force that keeps those walls intact. Modern investors search for companies with this combination. Not simply profit, but purpose. Not simply patents, but culture. Not simply dominance, but discipline. History shows which monopolies endure and which collapse. The ones that endure are those built on identity, not opportunism. On mastery, not mass production. On secrecy, not noise. On refinement, not growth for growth's sake. Murano's furnaces prove a truth older than all modern financial theory. Protect the rare, honor the lineage, guard the flame, and build a culture so strong that even when the world changes, the essence of your craft remains unshaken. This is the empire of unbreakable monopolies, empires forged not by conquest, but by cultivation, not by expansion, but by concentration, not by force, but by the invisible strength of identity. There are some deaths in history that happen with a single strike, loud and catastrophic. And then there are slower deaths, quieter, more sorrowful, like a candle guttering in an empty room, its flame shrinking not from violence, but from the steady exhaustion of time. The secrets of Murano, once guarded with blades, oaths, and the unblinking eyes of the council, faced such a death. No single moment ended the monopoly. No foreign power stormed the lagoon. No artisan betrayed the island so completely that the secrets unraveled. Instead, Murano's decline crept in like a tide, gentle but persistent. The first shift came with technology. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the rise of scientific glassmaking in Bohemia and England introduced new forms of transparency. The furnaces of Central Europe, fueled by wood rather than charcoal, produced different qualities of heat. These furnaces created lead glass, brighter, heavier, capable of refracting light in ways Murano could not easily replicate. Bohemian crystal dazzled European courts with a brilliance that even Murano's famed cristallo struggled to match. And slowly, quietly, the center of the glass world began to tilt northward. Then came the Industrial Revolution, a force no island could contain. Machines replaced artisans. Factories replaced workshops. Cheap glass flooded the market like water rushing into a cracked vessel. Murano's chandeliers, once so rare they were counted as princely treasures, now competed against factory-made imitations at a fraction of the cost. But the greatest threat did not come from competition. It came from the fading spirit within the island itself. Generations who had once felt the weight of secrecy as a sacred duty now inherited a world where secrecy no longer guaranteed prosperity. Young artisans questioned whether the craft was worth the confinement it demanded. Families began documenting their formulas, breaking the ancient tradition of oral transmission. The rituals that had once held the community together slowly dissolved into routine. The pride that had shaped the identity of Murano softened under economic pressures. Even the Council of Ten, once feared and omnipresent, disappeared into the pages of history. When Napoleon conquered Venice in 1797, he abolished the council with a stroke of his pen, dismantling the very institution that had guarded the island's secrets for centuries. There were no more invisible eyes watching the apprentices. No more whispered interrogations in shadowed corridors. No more decrees reminding artisans of their duty to the Republic. The cage dissolved, and with it, the psychological architecture that had sustained the monopoly. Some masters celebrated their freedom. Others felt unmoored. A few whispered that the furnaces burned differently now, as if the flame itself sensed the loss of vigilance. Without the constraints of secrecy, without the pressure of confinement, the craft began to loosen in ways subtle, yet undeniable. But decline is never one note. It contains layers, ruins in one corner, renewal in another. In the 19th century, as Murano struggled to find its place in a world overflowing with glass, a new kind of master emerged. These artisans embraced innovation without abandoning tradition. They experimented with sculptural forms, reviving forgotten techniques like filigree, marine, and aventurine. They collaborated with artists from across Europe, transforming Murano from a fortress of secrecy into a sanctuary of creativity. And yet, something essential had changed forever. For centuries, the artisans had worked with the knowledge that their craft was irreplaceable, that their secrets shaped the destiny of Venice, that they were the heart of an empire of transparency and fire. When that empire dissolved, the craft remained, but the meaning behind it blurred. The death of a monopoly is not the death of a craft. It is the death of exclusivity, of leverage, of the unseen power that once radiated from every furnace. Murano continued producing beauty, but no longer held the world in its glass-bound fist. No longer did kings bow their heads to the artisans. No longer did spies lurk in taverns hoping to steal a secret. No longer did nations tremble at the thought of losing access to Murano's brilliance. The monopoly died not with a roar, but with a sigh. Yet even in decline, Murano carried within it something immortally human, the ability to adapt, transform, and find meaning even when empires fall. And this is where the philosophy behind its story emerges into full clarity. All monopolies, no matter how powerful, face erosion. What sustains them is not the strength of their walls, but the vitality of their center. When the center weakens, when identity fractures, when purpose fades, the outer defenses crumble. Murano teaches us that a moat, no matter how deep, must be renewed constantly. It teaches us that brilliance requires guardianship. And it teaches us that even the most guarded secrets can fade when the world shifts faster than the culture that created them. During the twilight years of the Venetian Republic, Murano began to feel something it had never felt before: irrelevance creeping at the door. It did not announce itself with violence. It seeped into the island gradually, like fog rolling across the lagoon. The furnaces still burned. The craftsmen still labored with devotion. But the world outside had changed in ways the ancient monopoly had not prepared for. Foreign merchants who once trembled before the Council of Ten now walked across the island with casual indifference. They examined chandeliers and goblets with admiration, but without fear. Some looked not for secrets, but for bargains. Murano, once the gatekeeper of enlightenment and beauty, was becoming another vendor in the marketplace of Europe. The fall of Venice in 1797 accelerated this decline. When Napoleon's troops marched through the city, they dismantled the very structures that had preserved Murano's power. Guilds were disbanded. Regulations dissolved. The island found itself suddenly exposed, forced to navigate the world without the invisible armor that had protected it for centuries. The secrets that once felt like sacred burdens now hung in the air, with no one left to enforce their silence. Some artisans welcomed this newfound freedom. They dreamed of traveling, learning, expanding their craft in ways the council would never have permitted. But others felt as if the ground beneath their feet had shifted. They had lived their entire lives within the steady rhythm of tradition. Without that rhythm, they felt disoriented, as if the fire itself had lost its voice. Murano's decline was not a sharp fall. It was a series of slow, aching losses. The first loss was economic. Mass production swept across Europe. Factories in England, France, and Bohemia churned out glass in quantities Murano could never match. For the first time, Venetian glass faced competition not from rival artisans, but from machines. Murano's strength, its handcrafted perfection, became its vulnerability. The world wanted glass quickly and cheaply. The painstaking labor that defined Murano was suddenly a disadvantage. The second loss was cultural. The younger generation grew restless, yearning for opportunities beyond the island. Families that had preserved secrets for generations watched their sons leave for factories in mainland Italy or workshops in France. Apprenticeships thinned. The oral traditions weakened. The rituals that once defined the craft began to disappear, replaced by the practical necessities of survival. And then came the greatest loss of all, the loss of purpose. For centuries, the artisans of Murano had believed they were guarding something sacred. Without that sacredness, the craft risked becoming hollow. A master who once approached the furnace with reverence now approached it with weariness. The fire still glowed, but it no longer demanded the same devotion. Yet decline, in its strange and quiet way, can reveal what truly matters. One night, during the mid-19th century, an aging master named Carlo Zanforlin stood before his furnace long after the others had gone home. The glass had cooled. The workshop was silent. Carlo had lived through Murano's last golden chapter and had watched the island's prestige crumble year by year. He had seen apprentices drift away, workshops close, and foreign imitations flood the markets. He had seen the craft he loved reduced to a ghost of its former glory. And yet, standing before the dormant furnace, he smiled. Carlo understood something the world often forgets. A craft is not kept alive by power, or privilege, or even monopoly. It is kept alive by hands that refuse to stop shaping it. Secrets can fade. Empires can fall. But as long as someone chooses to stand before the flame and create, the craft endures. The next morning, Carlo gathered his remaining apprentices and taught them a forgotten technique, one his grandfather had whispered to him in secret. A technique rarely used because it took time the world no longer valued. The apprentices watched, astonished, as Carlo produced glass that shimmered with a depth and warmth none of them had ever seen. And for a moment, it felt as though the old Murano had returned, not as a monopoly, but as a memory preserved through love, through effort, through stubborn devotion. Stories like Carlo's reveal the truth at the center of every dying empire. The real secret is not the formula. It is the heart behind it. When the heart remains, the craft can be reborn. When the heart fades, even the greatest monopoly becomes dust. Murano's decline teaches a lesson older than Venice itself. No matter how powerful a fortress may be, it must evolve. It must accept change, adapt to new worlds, and renew its purpose. Without renewal, even the deepest moat becomes shallow. The monopoly died slowly, but the craft survived because the fire still lived inside the artisans. And in that quiet survival, Murano transformed, not into an empire of unbroken dominance, but into a living museum of memory, beauty, and resilience. In the years that followed Murano's collapse as a monopoly, something unexpected began to unfold on the island. Decline, which at first seemed like an irreversible descent into obscurity, transformed into a strange kind of liberation. Without the council's grip, without the fear of espionage, without the weight of secrecy pressing upon every gesture, the artisans felt an unfamiliar sensation moving through their workshops, room to breathe. At first, this freedom felt unsettling. Generations had been raised within strict traditions, shaped by the belief that the craft's survival depended on silence and containment. Now, with no authority enforcing those codes, the artisans were forced to confront their own understanding of what it meant to be a master. The question that had once haunted men in the shadows of the furnaces now returned with sharpened clarity. If the world already knows our secrets, what are we now? The older masters reacted with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. They clung to the rituals, repeating motions learned from fathers and grandfathers, determined to preserve the sanctity of their lineage even if the world no longer bowed before it. Their workshops became sanctuaries of memory, places where the past lingered in the glow of the furnaces like a ghost refusing to leave. But the younger generation felt something different stirring inside them. Without the weight of monopoly-bearing tradition, they saw not loss but possibility. They began to experiment freely. They blended Murano's forms with influences from France, Austria, and even Japan. They incorporated bold colors, twisted shapes, and sculptural designs that had never existed in Venice's centuries of glassmaking. What the council once would have condemned as reckless deviation now became sparks of innovation. A new spirit took root on the island, a spirit not of secrecy, but of expression. One of the figures at the center of this quiet renaissance was a young artisan named Sophia Marine. Sophia was the granddaughter of a renowned master, but she approached the craft with a sensitivity that differed radically from those who came before her. While the old masters focused on clarity, symmetry, and precision, Sophia sought emotion in the glass. She experimented with textures, allowing the molten material to cool unevenly so that it created ripples and fractures that resembled frozen memories. Her pieces were imperfect by classical standards, yet they possessed an undeniable soul. When Sophia first displayed her work in Venice, traditionalists scoffed. Yet travelers and collectors were enthralled. They saw in her creations a new language of glass, one that reflected the turbulence, the fragility, and the quiet resilience of the human spirit. Her work symbolized what Murano had become, not a fortress guarding an empire, but a survivor learning to redefine its identity. In this era, Murano's transformation became philosophical. The artisans realized that the death of their secrets did not mean the death of their craft. It meant the death of their power. And this distinction reshaped everything. For centuries, Murano's brilliance had been measured by its exclusivity. Beauty was valuable because it was rare, and it was rare because it was hidden. Now, beauty could no longer rely on scarcity. It needed authenticity. It needed depth. It needed meaning. The artisans who embraced this truth discovered a new kind of mastery, one untethered from secrecy but anchored in intention. They began creating pieces that were less about demonstrating flawless technique and more about conveying stories, emotions, and artistic philosophy. Murano evolved from a center of guarded industry into a center of expressive artistry. And yet, beneath this renaissance, the embers of the old world still glowed. Some families continued to whisper secrets at night, determined to preserve the fragments of the monopoly that once defined them. Some techniques remained hidden, not out of necessity, but out of reverence. And though the Council of Ten was gone, its ghost sometimes lingered in the minds of older artisans. They still glanced over their shoulders when crafting something new, as if expecting a silent figure to step from the shadows and demand an explanation. But the world had changed. The secrets no longer required guardians. Competitors no longer needed spies. The monopoly had dissolved, leaving behind a craft stripped of power but rich with identity. Murano's decline reveals a truth often overlooked in stories of empire. Monopolies die, but meaning does not have to. The real treasure of Murano was never the formulas. It was the devotion, the fire that burned not only in the furnaces, but in the hearts of the artisans who refused to let the craft die. When the world no longer needed their secrets, Murano learned to offer something else instead. Authenticity shaped through centuries of love, loss, and transformation. In this final phase of the island's story, Murano became what it had always quietly been beneath the machinery of power, a community of creators. Not guardians of a monopoly, but guardians of beauty. What emerged was not the same Murano that once held Europe in its grip. It was something gentler, humbler, but in its own way, more enduring. An island no longer defined by control or fear, but by the slow, deliberate artistry of human hands shaping molten light. And it is here, in this softened glow, that Murano whispers its last great lesson. Even when secrets fade, even when empires fall, the craft endures, so long as someone tends the flame. There is an hour on Murano when the world seems to disappear. It comes just after sunset, when the lagoon mirrors the last fading sliver of gold and the chatter of the day dies into a hush. The tourists leave. The workshops lock their doors. The furnaces dim to a quiet heartbeat. In that silence, the island feels ancient again, stripped of the rush of centuries, returned to the stillness from which it was born. On such an evening, a man named Aurelio Conti walked alone down a narrow alley that wound between shuttered workshops. Aurelio was one of the last true masters of Murano. Not a celebrity, not a businessman, a craftsman in the oldest sense of the word, a man whose identity was shaped entirely by the glow of the furnace and the whisper of molten glass. His beard had turned white with age. His hands were lined and scarred, but his fingers still carried the reflex of a lifetime spent turning glowing threads of glass into forms that seemed impossible. Aurelio learned the craft not through formal training or institutional programs, but in the way of the ancient world, by standing beside his father, watching, failing, listening to the fire more carefully than he listened to human words. On this night, Aurelio returned to his workshop not to work, but to say goodbye. The furnace before him was old. Its bricks bore the stains of decades of flame. The iron tools hanging from the wall had belonged to his grandfather. Dust lay thick along the shelves, though Aurelio still wiped them clean every morning out of habit. He had decided, after months of reluctance, to extinguish the furnace. Age had slowed his hands. Economic pressures had thinned his apprentices. The island, though still alive with artistry, no longer needed him as it once did. But he could not simply let the fire die. Not without witnessing its final breath. He approached the furnace slowly, running his hands along its rough surface. The faint warmth beneath his palms felt like the fading pulse of an old friend. He closed his eyes and listened. Even nearly dormant, the furnace emitted a low hum, soft, rhythmic, like the whisper of a sleeping creature. Aurelio remembered standing here as a boy, the fire roaring so bright it turned his skin gold. He remembered the first time he held the blowpipe, trembling as he shaped a clumsy sphere that collapsed into itself. He remembered the pride in his father's eyes, not at the shape, but at the courage it took to face the flame. He remembered the nights they worked side by side, sweat dripping down their faces, laughter echoing in the heat. He remembered the mornings when he arrived before dawn and found his father already there, lost in the dance of creation. The furnace had been witness to it all. As he stood there now, Aurelio felt years collapsing into moments. He reached for a small stool, the one he used when working delicate forms, and sat before the fire. He inhaled the scent of ash, metal, and faint sweetness, the scent that had permeated every memory of his life. His eyes welled with tears, not from heat, but gratitude. He whispered to the quiet furnace something no one else could hear. A farewell, a confession, a promise. And then, after a long pause, he opened the door of the furnace and watched the last ember flicker in the dim light. It pulsed once, twice, as though recognizing him. Aurelio did not move. He watched the ember fade to a faint glow, then to a soft red, and finally to black. The room grew cold. He sat in the silence that followed, a silence so complete that it emptied him of every emotion except a gentle ache. The furnace had died, but something within him felt fiercely alive. As if by releasing the flame, he had preserved the memory more completely. As if the story of Murano had not ended with this extinguished fire, but had passed into him, into the island, into the craft that would continue long after he was gone. For Murano was no longer an empire, no longer a monopoly, no longer the fortress of secrets it once had been. But it was still a place where beauty was shaped by hands rather than machines, a place where the past lingered in the glow of the furnaces, a place where the craft, though stripped of its old power, had found a new purpose. As Aurelio stood to leave, he pressed his hand to the cool bricks one last time. He whispered again, and though the words were lost to the room, their meaning was clear. The flame is gone, but the fire remains. Aurelio stepped into the cool night air, closing the workshop door behind him. The hinges groaned softly, as though mourning with him. The alleyway was dim, lit only by the moon shimmering over the lagoon. He paused beneath a small iron lamp that had long stopped working, and for a moment, he simply listened to the distant hum of water lapping against stone, to the faint laughter drifting from a faraway tavern, to the memory of furnaces that once roared like lions in every workshop around him. Murano, in darkness, felt like a cathedral. He made his way toward the canal, each step grounding him in the present, even as his mind drifted through the corridors of the past. He passed the Veronese workshop, now abandoned. He passed the old Rossi foundry, once home to the island's greatest Murran masters, now shuttered and silent. Each doorway held ghosts of artisans who had shaped the world without ever leaving these narrow lanes. The echo of generations followed him like a procession. When he reached the edge of the canal, Aurelio saw someone standing there. A young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, leaning over the railing, watching the lights of Venice flicker in the distance. Her posture carried the weight of both contemplation and uncertainty, something he recognized instantly. She turned when she heard his footsteps. It was Sophia Marin. He had known her since she was a child, running barefoot through the alleys, collecting fragments of discarded glass like treasures. He had watched her grow into an artist whose work shimmered with emotion rather than tradition. Sophia's pieces disturbed some of the older masters, yet captivated collectors from across Europe. Her presence was a sign that the craft was evolving, stretching, searching for a new shape. "Aurelio," she said softly, her voice carrying the same gentleness as her art. "I saw your workshop was dark tonight." "Aye," he nodded, leaning against the stone railing beside her. "It is finished," he answered. "The furnace has taken its last breath." She looked at him with a mixture of sorrow and admiration. "I thought this day would come," she whispered. "But not so soon." Aurelio smiled faintly. "Soon? My hands have lived 2 lives already. And the island needs new voices now, not old ones like mine." Sophia didn't respond immediately. The water reflected the moon in rippling silver threads. A gondola drifted silently across the canal, its silhouette gliding like a shadow over liquid glass. Finally, she spoke. "When I was a girl, I used to imagine the furnaces were alive," she said. "Breathing, dreaming, holding secrets no one could ever truly understand." Aurelio chuckled softly. "You weren't wrong." She glanced at him, then back at the water. "But now, I sometimes wonder, do we still have secrets? Or are we just polishing what's left of them?" Aurelio turned toward her. The moonlight softened the deep lines of his face. "Sophia," he said gently, "Murano's secrets were never just formulas. Never the mixtures, never the timing. The real secret was always the devotion, the discipline, the way a master gives his life to the fire without asking the world for anything in return." Sophia breathed in slowly, absorbing his words. "The world can take the formulas," he continued. "It can take the markets. It can take the monopoly. But it cannot take the heart. Not unless we give it away." Sophia lowered her gaze, and Aurelio sensed the weight she carried. An artist standing between past and future, between tradition and transformation. Her generation bore a different burden, not preserving a monopoly, but preserving meaning. Then, with a voice tinged with both hope and fear. She asked, "And what if the heart changes?" Aurelio turned his eyes toward the horizon, where Venice's faint lights shimmered like dying stars. The question lingered between them, fragile and honest. "Then the craft changes with it," he replied. "And that is not a loss. That is life." Sophia stepped closer to him. In her expression, he saw the future of the island, uncertain, courageous, restless, alive. She was not a continuation of the old world. She was the beginning of a new one. "Will you teach me?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Not the techniques. I can learn those. Teach me the feeling, the way you listen to the fire." Aurelio closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, a spark had returned, small but unmistakable. "The fire speaks differently to every generation," he said. "But yes, I will teach you how to hear it." They stood together in silence, the old master and the young artisan, watching the water ripple beneath the moon. Around them, Murano slept. But something stirred, something that felt like renewal, like a pulse returning to an aging body. The furnaces had dimmed. The monopoly had died. The old secrets had slipped into memory. But the flame, the true flame, moved quietly from one heart to another. The following morning, a pale mist settled over the lagoon, softening the edges of the island until Murano looked like a memory suspended above the water. Aurelio arrived at Sophia's workshop just as the sun broke through, casting faint ribbons of gold across the dusty floor. The furnace there was not yet lit. Its mouth was dark, awaiting breath. Sophia stood beside it, her hair tied back, her expression focused but unsure. She had prepared the workspace exactly as Aurelio had instructed, tools laid out on cloth, glass rods arranged by color, buckets filled with clean water, and sand swept meticulously from the floor. Yet despite her preparations, she looked like someone standing at the threshold of a sacred ritual whose rules were still a mystery. Aurelio entered without speaking. He walked around the furnace, touching it the way one touches the face of an old friend. Sophia watched him with quiet reverence. The furnace was newer than Aurelio's, its bricks clean, its iron hinges free of rust. Yet it carried the same potential, the same dormant hunger. "Light it," he said. Sophia hesitated for only a breath before striking the flint. Sparks danced, caught the kindling, and slowly, the fire, small, uncertain, took form. The glow spread through the opening, filling the workshop with a warmth that seemed to push back the morning chill. Aurelio stepped closer, feeling the familiar heat rising. Sophia stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the flame. "Do you hear it?" Aurelio asked. Sophia listened. At first, she heard nothing beyond the crackle of wood and the dull hum of heat. But as the fire grew, the sound changed. It became rhythmic, whisper-like, almost a heartbeat. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I do." Aurelio nodded. "Good. That is the beginning." They worked in silence for hours, the kind of silence that belongs to rituals older than language. Aurelio guided her hands as she gathered molten glass from the furnace, turning it slowly, keeping the movement steady so the material would not collapse. She shaped a small orb, then a stem, then a delicate curve. Her hands trembled with the weight of the moment. They were not just shaping glass, they were shaping inheritance. At one point, Sophia paused, staring at the glowing mass she held. "It feels alive," she whispered. "It is," Aurelio said. "Every piece is a breath captured in form." By midday, she had created something simple, a small vessel, translucent with hints of amber, but beautiful in its simplicity. Aurelio examined it, turning it gently in his hands. The color glowed as though sunlight had been trapped inside. "It's imperfect," she said, almost apologetic. "Good," Aurelio replied. "Perfection is the arrogance of dead things. Imperfection is the mark of life." Sophia smiled, and for a moment, the workshop felt like a bridge between centuries, between the old world of secrets and the new world of expression, between control and freedom, between memory and possibility. As Aurelio cleaned the tools and Sophia cooled the glass, she finally asked the question he had known was coming. What will happen to Murano when the last of the old masters are gone? Aurelio walked to the window and looked out at the other workshops, some active, some abandoned, all part of a lineage stretching back 1,000 years. "Murano will become what it has always been," he said. "A place where fire teaches those willing to listen." Sophia joined him by the window. The island lay before them, rusted chimneys, worn stone paths, boats swaying gently in the canal. It looked neither triumphant nor defeated. It looked alive, Aurelio continued. The secret was never the glass. It was the devotion. As long as one person approaches the furnace with love instead of ambition, Murano will endure. Sophia nodded, and Aurelio saw in her eyes something he had feared Murano had lost. Wonder. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "You are not here to preserve the past. You are here to continue the flame." They stood together in the soft afternoon light, 2 generations woven together by fire. Beyond the island, the world moved on. Factories roared, machines churned, and markets shifted. But here, in this small workshop, the essence of Murano lived on, not as a monopoly, nor a secret, nor an empire, but as a quiet, enduring act of creation. Aurelio knew, even when the furnaces of his own workshop lay cold, the craft had already found its next guardian. You are sitting beside a quiet fire now. The kind of fire that asks for nothing, yet offers everything. Its glow is steady, its warmth gentle, and its light moves across your mind like a soft tide, rising and falling with your breath. Tonight, you are no longer in your room. You are on Murano, the island of furnaces, the island of secrets, the island where glass was shaped like memory, and memory was shaped like light. The furnaces hum softly around you, not loud, not fierce, simply present, like old friends who have waited for you for a very, very long time. With each breath you take, The fire grows a little warmer, and with each exhale, the weight of your day begins to slip away. You can almost hear the footsteps of the old masters, slow, measured, patient. They move through the workshop like gentle echoes, whispers carried by heat. You feel yourself settling deeper into this place, a place where time moves differently, a place where ambition softens into intention, a place where pressure fades, leaving only clarity. Let the world outside dissolve for now. Let the noise fall behind you like cooled ash. Here, there is only the glow of the flame. Here, there is only the quiet rhythm of your breath. Here, there is only you and the ancient memory of creation. The fire beside you speaks in a language older than words. You don't need to force yourself to understand. You only need to listen. In the warm glow of the flame, you begin to remember something you have always known. You were not meant to rush. You were not meant to chase endlessly. You were meant to create with intention, to build with meaning, to grow slowly, deeply, patiently, the way glass transforms in the hands of a master. Feel the warmth spreading through your body now, down your arms, across your chest, into your hands, which have carried so many burdens, now soften, loosen, rest. In this moment, nothing is required of you. No decisions, no effort, no urgency, only presence, just presence, and breath, and the soft voice of the fire. The masters of Murano spent entire lifetimes listening to this same warmth. They understood that creation was not force. Creation was surrender. Surrender to the moment. Surrender to the breath. Surrender to the slow unfolding of mastery. You feel yourself surrendering now. The tension slipping from your jaw. Your shoulders easing downward. Your thoughts stretching into calm, gentle lines. The fire glows. Your breath slows. Your mind softens. You are safe here. You are present here. You are exactly where you need to be. Let the flame guide you deeper. Let the warmth guide you inward. Let the memory of Murano wrap around you like a soft embrace. You are here. You are calm. You are whole. The fire beside you shifts, glowing a little brighter, then softening again, as though breathing with you. Inhale. Warmth rises. Exhale. Warmth settles. Again and again, until your breath and the fire feel like the same quiet rhythm. You are no longer simply watching the flame. You are becoming part of its stillness, part of its patience, part of its ancient, unhurried wisdom. Feel the way the warmth gathers around your chest. Not heavy, not sharp, just warm, gentle, steady, like a hand resting over your heart, reminding you that you are safe. Each breath draws you deeper into the silence between thoughts, a silence that feels soft, like cooling glass, a silence that feels familiar, like something you lost long ago and are only now remembering. As you sit beside this quiet furnace, you begin to notice a sense of expansion, as though your mind has more space now, more room to breathe, more room to rest. There is no rush here, no deadlines, no pressure, only the slow drift of the firelight and the calm weightlessness of your body sinking into ease. You may notice your thoughts growing distant, like boats drifting away on a calm lagoon. You don't need to chase them. You don't need to pull them back. You can let them go. They were never yours to hold tightly. Let the fire hold them for you. Let the warmth dissolve them. You are here to rest, to soften, to let go. The old masters of Murano worked beside the furnaces for decades, not through force, not through tension, but through presence, through patience, through the gentle acceptance of process over perfection. And in this quiet moment, you feel that same patience settling into your bones. Slow, ancient, reassuring. The fire flickers softly. You breathe, and something inside you unlocks, a knot untying itself, a weight releasing, a small doorway opening into peace. You are drifting now, slowly, effortlessly, as if the warmth is carrying you inward, into a place where the body rests and the mind unwinds. You are safe. You are calm. You are held. Allow the fire to whisper something to you, a truth it has carried for centuries. You do not need to be extraordinary tonight. You do not need to produce, or achieve, or prove anything to anyone. You are allowed to simply exist. Just breathe. Just be. The warmth deepens in your chest, then flows to your shoulders, down your arms, into your hands. Your fingers loosen. Your palms soften. Everything grows lighter. There is nothing left to do. Nothing left to fix. Nothing left to resist. Only rest. Only warmth. Only the gentle echo of the flame. The fire has become very soft now. Not bright. Not demanding. Just a warm glow, like the memory of a sunset still resting on your skin. Its light moves slowly, like a tide that knows exactly where to go, and exactly when to return. Your breath follows it. In and out, in and out. Each cycle smoother, slower, quieter. The masters of Murano believed that glass held the breath of its maker, that every piece carried a fragment of the life that shaped it. And in this moment, your breath becomes the same, a soft imprint of who you are, who you have been, and who you are becoming. There is no strain here, no effort, just breath, just warmth, just the slow unwinding of a mind, ready for rest. You feel your thoughts thinning into threads, gentle, weightless, drifting away. You do not need to hold them. You do not need to sort them. They can simply float, farther and farther, until they disappear beyond the edge of your awareness. Your body grows heavier now, your arms soft, your legs warm, your spine quiet, your jaw loose, your eyelids settling like drifting feathers. Every breath pulls you deeper into the softness, into the safety, into the quiet. Tonight, the fire is your guardian. It keeps watch while you let go. It speaks to the parts of you that have forgotten how to rest. It reminds you that rest is not weakness, Rest is the return to yourself. The warmth moves into your back now, releasing the tightness that lived there all day. It moves to your stomach, easing the knots, softening the hidden tensions. It moves to your chest, slowing your heartbeat into a calm, steady rhythm. You are sinking now, not downward, but inward, into a space where the noise of life cannot reach you. A space shaped only by warmth, only by breath, only by peace. If a thought arises, let it drift away like smoke. If a memory appears, let it fade like cooling embers. Everything is allowed to pass. Nothing is required to stay. You are entering the same stillness the artisans felt at the end of a long day, when the furnaces dimmed and the island grew quiet. A stillness that holds you gently, warmly, completely. You may feel as though you are floating now, not up, not away, but deeper into the comfort of your own being. A weightless kind of rest, a peaceful kind of drifting. The fire whispers once more, in its ancient, glowing voice. You have done enough. You have given enough. You have tried enough. Tonight, you may rest. Let that truth wrap around you like the softest blanket, warm, steady, holding you with the gentlest embrace. Your breath slows, your muscles release, your mind softens. The world falls away. There is only warmth now, only quiet, only peace. The fire dims, its glow fading into a soft ember, and as it fades, your consciousness fades with it, drifting into a deep, nourishing sleep where the body heals and the mind renews. You are safe. You are calm. You are home. Sleep now. Rest deeply, and let the echoes of the flame carry you into dreams.